Hello. Tonight we set sail on a slightly questionable vessel bobbing gently on the Aegean Sea, under a sky just fuzzy with starlight. The breeze is light, the water smells like sun-warmed salt, and something oddly sweet, maybe overripe grapes. You're standing at the edge of a wooden deck, staring down at rope coils that look recently used, but you haven't seen a single other soul on board yet. Strange. The mast creaks and the sail flutters overhead with all the elegance of a toga stuck in a laurel bush. Welcome aboard. You're not exactly sure why you agreed to this impromptu trip. Someone at the docks offered you a ride, and you, half sunburnt, half curious, said yes. Classic you. The moment you stepped onto the ship, though, things felt just a bit off. Not ominous, just quietly weird. Like a dream where everyone's wearing togas, but no one mentions it. A clay cup is pressed into your hand before you can ask questions. Wine, slightly lukewarm, aggressively fruity, and probably stronger than recommended for midday sailing. You take a cautious sip. It tastes like fermented figs and bad decisions. You scan the deck again. Someone has to be steering, right? And then you see him. Standing by the stern, gazing dreamily into the waves, is a young man with unreasonably good posture and a robe that shimmers somewhere between lavender and defiance. He's barefoot, of course. His hair is thick and curly, as though grown under special conditions. He's surrounded by a faint smell of thyme and something vaguely floral. At first glance, you assume he's some bored noble catching a lift. Then he turns, smiles, and raises a goblet in silent toast. That smile? It's either the expression of a wine merchant 3 cups deep, or someone who's already rewritten the laws of reality and is just waiting to see if you notice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Always fun to imagine us all drifting off across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander closer to the purple-robed man. The boards beneath your feet groan softly, not in protest, but more like a polite warning. A few vines snake along the railing. You pause. Were those there before? The young man's eyes gleam with a kind of serene mischief. He leans in, voice low and smooth.
"Lovely evening for a voyage," he murmurs. You're halfway through a nod when you realize no one introduced themselves, no one mentioned a destination, and most importantly, you didn't pay anyone. There's a sudden burst of laughter near the bow. You whirl around. Figures emerge from shadows. The crew finally showing themselves. All men, vaguely pirate-adjacent. Scarves, leather sandals. A lot of blinking, like they've just remembered they exist. One has an eel tattoo crawling up his neck. Another has a voice like crushed olives and starts singing a drinking song out of key. They barely glance at the man in purple. You lean in again. Do you know where we're headed? He simply grins. Somewhere or nowhere. Isn't that what wine is for? You glance at your cup. It's fuller than before. Odd. One of the sailors claps you on the back. "You're lucky," he says with a crooked grin. "We don't usually take passengers, but this fellow paid extra." He nods toward the purple man. You frown. With what? The sailor chuckles, walks off without answering, and begins adjusting rigging that already looks perfect. You feel the ship tilt, ever so slightly. The sea's still calm, but there's something uncanny in the air now, like a theater set just before the curtain rises. You glance again at the mysterious man, who, by the way, still hasn't blinked. Historians still argue whether this myth was based on a real cultic experience or if it was purely metaphor, a divine visitor, a group of arrogant sailors, and a ship that drifted straight into a god's wine-splashed trap. Either way, you're here now, and it's happening again. The sail suddenly billows, full and proud, despite the wind dropping to almost nothing. The ropes shiver like harp strings. Someone begins playing a flute, and you're not sure who brought one aboard. A vine curls out from the base of the mast and wraps itself neatly around a bucket. No one reacts. Except the man in purple. He lifts his goblet to his lips and drinks. The sun dips below the horizon, splashing the deck with gold. The air feels thick, like walking through honey, and the ship begins to hum. Not from any engine, obviously. It's a wooden ship, but it's humming, deep and low, as though the sea itself is singing in its sleep. You turn back to the man, intending to ask a few very practical questions, like what even is happening, but he's gone. Or rather, he's now sitting on a barrel that wasn't there moments ago. He's petting a small, twitchy animal that might be a fox, or a goat, possibly both. You take another sip of wine, because that feels like the correct response. The ship rocks gently beneath your feet as you take a slow breath. The sea is calm, the stars are beginning to blink into place overhead, and somewhere behind you, the sound of that mysterious flute continues, its melody both lilting and lazy, as if the tune itself might stop midway through for a nap. The strange man, your purple-robed fellow passenger, has resumed reclining, now nestled against a coil of rope that looks suspiciously like a throne for someone who doesn't take thrones seriously. In one hand, he holds the ever-full goblet, in the other a grape. He dangles it above his mouth, but never quite eats it, as if savoring the idea more than the fruit itself. You glance down at your own goblet again. You don't remember refilling it, and yet here it is, still pleasantly warm, still oddly fragrant. There's a faint trace of cinnamon this time, or maybe myrrh. You're not sure, but it feels vaguely celebratory and only slightly alarming. The ship's crew, meanwhile, has fully come to life. Sort of. A handful are laughing too loudly at a joke that wasn't that funny. One of them is trying to juggle apples, poorly. Another is dancing with a barrel. The pirate with the eel tattoo is now whispering at the mast, nodding as though it's replying. The man in purple turns his head slightly toward you. "They don't know who I am," he says, almost dreamily. "Yet." You raise an eyebrow. Should they? He flashes a grin that's equal parts charm and prophecy. Oh, they'll figure it out. Eventually. Most do. Right before the vines bloom. You look around. More green tendrils have crept onto the deck. They twist, slowly, lazily, almost as if they're stretching after a long nap. One brushes past your sandal, not threatening exactly, but undeniably sentient. "I'm going to guess you're not just a traveling wine critic," you say. He snorts. "I'm Dionysus, god of wine, madness, and theater, among other things." You blink. He shrugs. "Or a well-dressed lunatic with good branding. Your choice." A pause. Then he adds, "Historians still argue whether I was worshipped this early in seafaring communities, or if the myths were added later to explain shipwrecks caused by bad decisions and even worse navigation." You nod slowly. "So are we in a myth right now?" He twirls the grape by its stem. "Aren't we always?" And then the ship jolts. Not much, just a subtle sway, but enough to interrupt the flute's dreamy rhythm and send a few apples rolling across the deck. The crew doesn't seem to notice. They're arguing now, loudly. You catch snippets. "He's a soft noble. We can sell him. That robe's worth more than my last ship." One sailor, the helmsman, judging by his hand on the tiller, leans against the rudder with a grim look. He's the only one who hasn't touched the wine. You inch toward him. "Is everything okay?" He jerks his head toward Dionysus. "That man shouldn't be here. He's not mortal. Or he is, but he isn't." Comforting. "Then why let him aboard?" you ask. He exhales through his nose. "I didn't. The others saw a rich boy with soft hands and a generous coin pouch, thought they could ransom him." You glance back. Dionysus is now lying flat on the deck, vines forming a plush mat beneath him. He hums a tune that doesn't quite sync with the flute, as if composing his own melody in a key only he knows. One sailor approaches him, emboldened by rum or stupidity or both. "Nice robe," the sailor says, leering. "How much for it?" Dionysus opens one eye. "It's not for sale." The sailor grins. "Oh, I wasn't asking." You feel the temperature shift, just slightly. The air's still warm, but with a new edge, like static before a thunderstorm. Somewhere below deck, you hear something creak, a new sound, wet, stretching, not wood. The sailor reaches for the robe. And in that exact moment, a vine erupts from the plank beneath him, wrapping tightly around his wrist. He screams. The crew turns. Some run forward, others backward. No one touches the wine now. The vine lifts the sailor an inch off the deck, not angrily, just sternly. "I said it's not for sale," Dionysus murmurs again. He raises his goblet to the stars and takes a sip. And the vines, dozens now, began curling up the masts, twining around the sail, sprouting leaves and grape clusters that glow faintly silver in the starlight. The ship's scent shifts fully to a vineyard at midnight, sweet, rich, ancient. You back away slowly. The helmsman doesn't move, just watches. "This is a god, isn't it?" you whisper. The helmsman nods. "Or something worse. Something old, something festive." You both watch as Dionysus stands again, slowly, dreamily. The sailor is gently set down. Vines loosen. He collapses to the deck, sobbing. Dionysus hums a little louder. A grapevine wraps around the flute and begins playing it itself, because of course it does. The moonlight glints softly off the rippling sea as the ship glides forward. But something has shifted. You can feel it. It's not just the air, which now carries a heady aroma of crushed grapes and distant thunder. It's not even the vines slinking across the railings like lazy cats. No, it's the crew. They've gone oddly quiet. Somewhere behind you, a sailor vomits. Whether from fear or too much Dionysian generosity, you're not sure. You turn back to Dionysus, who is now standing at the bow, arms spread wide, his hair catching the breeze like it's auditioning for an amphora painting. "Lovely night for a mutiny, isn't it?" he says, not looking back. You blink. "What?" "Oh, not from me," he says, smiling. "They're the mutineers, or they were. Hard to keep track. Things tend to unravel when I board." You glance around. The helmsman is still at his post, white-knuckled. Several sailors have retreated below deck, whispering frantically. A few remain frozen mid-task, one gripping a rope that no longer seems to be connected to anything. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," Dionysus continues. "I just wanted a ride, a little wine, a nap, maybe a sea breeze in my curls." You don't respond, partly because you're not sure how to answer a minor Olympian who just weaponized grapes. He stretches, and the motion sends more vines spiraling gently from his sleeves. One of them tickles your ankle in what you hope is a friendly gesture. "You know," he says, almost conversationally, "in older versions of the myth, this ship belonged to Tyrrhenian pirates. Terrible hosts, tried to kidnap me? Very rude." You nod slowly. "And what did you do?" He smiles without warmth. "Turned them into dolphins." You look around. "Are there dolphins nearby?" "Not yet," he replies cheerfully. The sea grows smoother, flatter, too flat, as if the waves themselves have paused out of respect or fear. The moonlight glows brighter now, bouncing off the sails, which have inexplicably become laced with ivy. Even the figurehead at the prow looks more expressive somehow, like it's enjoying the drama.
One sailor, perhaps the bravest or the most foolish, edges toward Dionysus, blade drawn. He's the youngest of the crew, with shaky hands and wild eyes. "I don't know what you are," he growls, "but you're not steering this ship." Dionysus chuckles. "Of course not. You are. Or he is." He gestures lazily toward the helmsman. "I have no interest in steering. I'm the passenger." "But you're messing with the ship," the boy says, voice cracking. "Oh, darling," Dionysus sighs, "I'm not messing. I'm enhancing."
And with that, the mast flowers. Not figuratively, it literally flowers. Great white blooms burst open along the sails, trailing jasmine and wild grape. The scent is intoxicating. One of the older sailors stumbles forward, giggling. Another collapses onto a coil of rope, snoring. The vines make a surprisingly cozy blanket. You reach out to steady yourself on the rail and find that it, too, has turned to living wood, soft, warm, humming faintly. Dionysus turns to you. You're still grounded. Impressive. "I had a big lunch," you mutter. He snorts. "You'll do fine." "Fine for what?" He sips his wine. "The show." There's a moment of silence. The sea, the sky, the air, all waiting. And then it begins. Not a storm, not a mutiny, a theater. The vines begin twisting into shapes. Not just flowers now, but masks. Comedy and tragedy, grinning and weeping, circling the mast like actors in rehearsal. The sails ripple, becoming curtains. The deck groans beneath your feet, not in pain, but as if it's widening, preparing to become a stage. Dionysus raises one hand, fingers splayed like a conductor. And the sea answers. Waves rise, not crashing, but rolling, graceful, rhythmic, like music, like applause. "I told them I was a god," Dionysus murmurs. "They didn't listen, so now we do this the fun way." Historians still argue, he adds with a shrug, whether this story was allegory for divine justice or just one really bad cruise gone wrong. You duck as a vine whips past your head and forms into a chair. A throne, technically. It sways slightly, but looks surprisingly comfy. "Is this for me?" "No, I just wanted to see if you'd sit on a vine throne," Dionysus says. "But go ahead." You sit. It's very comfy. Below deck, you hear shouting. The sailors are trying to lower the anchor. The anchor, unfortunately, is now a pumpkin. "I warned them not to serve me fish," Dionysus mutters. Another sailor bursts topside, sees the flowering sails, screams, and jumps into the sea. You watch him bob in the water. No dolphins yet, just eerie calm. Dionysus twirls the goblet. He'll be fine. Probably. The wine has softened the tide. You glance at your own cup. "This isn't normal wine, is it?" "Oh no," he says. "It's wine the way the gods meant it. Dreams and memories, the occasional hallucination, a little chaos, good for digestion." The vines now drape the ship like a toga. Somewhere music plays, not the flute anymore, but something more like a lyre, gentle and haunting. The clouds part just enough to spotlight Dionysus in a golden beam, as if the cosmos itself has a sense of drama. "You should get some rest soon," he says without looking at you. "The dolphins are coming." And with that, he lies back down, surrounded by vines, crowned in grapes, lulled by the sea. You sit on your vine throne, the ship afloat in moonlight, the sea humming beneath you. Somewhere in the distance, a splash.
You sit there, half sunken into your vine throne, wondering how exactly you got involved in a maritime Dionysian dreamscape, and what the going rate is these days for mutiny compensation when the mutiny was thwarted by enchanted vegetation. The moonlight continues to shine its silvery approval down upon the ship, though, let's be honest, it doesn't really look like a ship anymore. It's more of a floating garden theater crossed with a party boat. The mast, blooming with fragrant vines, now bends slightly under the weight of clusters of grapes the size of apples. You can hear the quiet drip, drip of juice pooling onto the deck in little puddles of perfume. And then, a splash. You tense. It wasn't the usual rhythm of a wave, or the lazy plop of something heavy falling overboard. It was deliberate, curious, close. Another splash. And there, slicing through the moonlight-drenched water like curious arrows, are fins. At least half a dozen, smooth, sleek, and absolutely not sharks. Dolphins. Dionysus, now reclining sideways on a bed of ivy that has fashioned itself into a fainting couch, doesn't even open his eyes. Ah, there they are, my former hosts. Those are the pirates, you ask, not entirely sure how you feel about that. Were pirates, he says, waving a lazy hand. Now just very enthusiastic swimmers with a taste for acrobatics. You watch as the dolphins circle the ship with eerie precision. One leaps high, does a neat little flip, and vanishes again beneath the surface. Another swims close to the hull and peers upward just for a second, and you swear it winks. Historians still argue whether they were punished or enlightened, Dionysus adds, ever the ambiguous god. After all, who's to say being a dolphin isn't preferable to being a sailor with bad shoes and worse morals? It's a fair question, honestly. One of the dolphins whistles softly, and the sound seems to echo, not just across the water, but in your bones. The ship responds, creaking gently, as if shifting to acknowledge its new escort. You lean over the rail and watch them move. Their sleek bodies slice through the moonlight like ink across parchment. They're beautiful, oddly serene, and unmistakably coordinated. I taught them choreography, Dionysus says, as if that explains everything. Nothing fancy, just a little number I called Grape Expectations. You're about to ask if he's joking, but then the dolphins rise again, this time in perfect unison, forming a crescent arc around the ship before vanishing again below the surface.
Dionysus yawns. They'll keep us safe now, for the most part, unless someone opens a bottle of rum. They get competitive. The scent of the ocean has changed, less briny, more heady, infused with wine, wet wood, and crushed jasmine. Even the seagulls have stopped their usual screeching, replaced by an occasional coo or mutter from the vines that now seem to have opinions. You look toward the horizon, where stars scatter like spilled salt over velvet. There's no land in sight, only the endless, glistening sea, the gentle breathing of the waves, and the soft rhythm of dolphin fins slicing through water. Dionysus props himself up on one elbow. You know, he says, voice softer now, there's a version of this story where I'm not a god at all, just a clever wine merchant. Perhaps a little mad, traveling incognito, playing tricks on those who try to rob me. That would explain the wine-fueled illusions, you murmur. He grins. Wouldn't it? But no, I'm afraid I'm the real deal. God of wine, madness, and theatrical flair. Patron of misfits, revelers, and overgrown vines. A gust of wind rustles the sails, still laced with blooming ivy, and you notice something odd. A shape high above. A mask, maybe? No, a face. A woman's face, peeking out from between the folds of leaf and linen. You squint. She smiles faintly, then vanishes. Dionysus notices your expression. Ah, the maenads. They come and go, usually when there's wine. Are they dangerous? He considers. Only if you lie about enjoying the play. You quickly nod toward the deck. I'm having a wonderful time. He chuckles and takes another sip from his bottomless goblet. Below, the dolphins have begun a slow, circling ballet around the hull. You watch as one spins beneath the surface, trailing phosphorescent shimmer like stardust. The ship rocks gently with the movement, perfectly in tune. The sails shift again, and this time you hear something. Not music exactly, but the ghost of it, like a lullaby hummed by someone you can't quite see. It winds through the rigging, dips into the shadows, and flutters against your ear like a moth's wing. You close your eyes for a moment. The smell of wine and salt, the sound of dolphin splashes and whispered melodies, the faint vibration of the living wood beneath your feet. It's a lullaby made for sailors who never wanted to return to land. When you open your eyes, Dionysus is watching you. "You're relaxing," he says with mock disapproval. "Dangerous. Isn't that the whole point of the wine?" "No," he says, "that's the point of the story." He swirls his goblet, watching the liquid spiral like a galaxy. You tell people a tale like this, and they relax, because they're not part of it. But you're in it now, which makes you a character. And characters must play their roles. You swallow. "And what's my role?" Dionysus winks. "The listener, the observer, the chronicler. Or, if the vines like you, maybe just the napper in residence." The ship glides on, framed by stars and circled by dolphins. The vines hum quietly, the sea breathes, and Dionysus returns to his ivy chaise, humming a song that sounds older than time. You rest your hand on the rail, still alive, still warm, and let the rhythm of the waves pull you just a little deeper into the story.
The sea is smooth tonight, glassy almost, with only the gentlest swells rising and falling beneath the enchanted vessel. You feel it in your knees, in the soles of your feet, in the sleepy lull of your breath. This is not an ordinary voyage. It's a dream adrift on open waters, and you're now thoroughly inside it. Dionysus hasn't moved much in the past hour, if time is even behaving properly. He lies sprawled in his growing nest of leaves, vines curling around him like lazy cats. His goblet, still full despite frequent sips, glows faintly in the moonlight. From somewhere near the prow, a harp string twangs. You blink. There's no harpist in sight, no visible instrument. But the sound returns, soft, tentative notes, as if someone invisible is tuning by moonlight. You glance at Dionysus. "The ship's in a musical mood," he murmurs, barely lifting an eyelid. "Don't encourage it. Last time it tried jazz." You chuckle, and the ship responds with a playful strum. You take a few tentative steps along the deck. Every plank beneath your feet is mossy soft, like aged wood crossed with forest floor. Flowers peek from between the slats. One of them winks. That's probably fine. Ahead, carved into the newly blossomed prow, is a relief of a woman's face, elegant, serene, framed with vine-like curls. Her eyes are half-lidded, as if already dreaming. You raise a hand to touch the wood, and it pulses faintly beneath your fingers. "This ship," you ask aloud, "was it always yours?" "Not really," Dionysus replies from his leafy throne. "It belonged to the pirates, remember? But like all good things in life, it was persuaded." You turn. "Persuaded how?" "With kindness and a little divine horticulture." A pause. "And the dolphins?" "They're very persuasive swimmers." Historians still debate whether Dionysus's punishment of the Tyrrhenian pirates was divine justice or something more metaphorical. Some say the transformation into dolphins represents freedom, a release from the rigid structure of human hierarchy. Others argue it's an ironic mirror of their former lives, bound to the sea, but with no gold to chase and no rum to plunder. You're still mulling that over when something tugs at your foot. You look down. A vine, thin as a strand of hair, is gently coiling around your ankle. Not tight, just a tap on the shoulder, botanically speaking. You follow it with your eyes as it slithers back across the deck, up the mast, and into the shadows where the rigging is now absolutely blooming.
Another vine offers you a goblet. You hesitate, but it smells perfect. Not just wine, but every good memory you've ever associated with wine. Candlelit dinners, cool evenings on balconies, cheap bottles on picnic blankets. You sip. It tastes like stories. The ship gives a little appreciative creak. Behind you, Dionysus sits up, as if roused by the shared moment. "You're adjusting well," he notes. "Most mortals panic by now, or get seasick." Does this ship even move in a straight line? Define straight. Fair enough. You sit down near the rail. The dolphins are still keeping pace, now joined by a curious school of lanternfish, glowing like string lights beneath the waves. They form outlines, constellations in reverse. One even looks like a wine bottle, complete with cork. Dionysus joins you, stretching his arms overhead, his ivy crown rustling softly. "Want to hear something fun?" he asks. "Always. I once turned an entire village into cicadas because they refused to dance." You blink. That sounds excessive. "They were really bad dancers," he says, dead serious. Historians still argue whether that story was literal or just poetic embellishment, you mutter, sipping again. "Oh, it was very literal," he says, grinning, "but very poetic cicadas." The dolphins whistle, almost like laughter. The wind picks up, but it's a warm breeze, like breath through a flute. It carries the scent of distant lands, figs, myrrh, something that might be roasted chestnuts or incense, or both. Dionysus inhales deeply. "We're getting close," he says. "To what?" "Drama." "Ah, of course." He points ahead, toward a thickening mist curling along the water. It glows faintly, lavender and gold, and pulses like a heartbeat. Beyond it, though you can't see it yet, awaits a new cast of characters. You can feel it in your spine, like a stage set behind curtains, like the hush before the first line. You rise, your feet steady now on the gently living wood. "Will they be pirates too?" you ask. "No," he says. "Actors." "Oh no." "Oh yes." The ship groans playfully, as if stretching its sails in anticipation of the next act. You can't help but smile. Whatever's ahead, at least you won't face it alone. You have dolphins, sentient vines, wine made of memories, and a god who treats divine punishment like community theater. The fog ahead ripples, and somewhere in the distance, a tambourine jingles. You lean forward, bracing yourself for whatever curious nonsense comes next. The voyage continues. You pass through the lavender fog like a dream slipping into deeper sleep. It clings to your hair and eyelashes in sparkling flecks, then dissolves like sugar on the tongue. The sea hushes beneath you. No waves, no wind, only the soft creak of the vine-draped ship and the far-off murmur of tambourines. When the mist parts, it reveals something odd. A floating stage. Yes, a literal wooden stage bobbing serenely in the open sea. Red velvet curtains flap gently in the non-existent breeze, and golden oil lamps dangle from crooked masts surrounding it. Atop the stage stands a man in a purple tunic, dramatically gesturing with a scroll in one hand and a rubber chicken in the other. He freezes mid-speech when your ship appears. "Finally!" he shouts. "The audience!" Dionysus waves lazily from his tangle of vines.
"You're early, Thespius." "You're late," the man snaps. "We rehearsed for weeks." You watch, wide-eyed, as more figures emerge from behind the curtains, men and women in ancient Greek costumes, all in various states of theatrical over-preparation. One has a fake beard that reaches his knees. Another is dressed as a giant olive. "This," you murmur, "can't be real." "Oh, it's real," Dionysus says, or at least very committed to the bit. Thespius, who might be an actor, or a minor demigod, or possibly both, launches into a monologue. It's a heavily dramatized retelling of the time Dionysus disguised himself as a mortal and got rejected from a village inn because he had grape stains on his robe. The performance involves interpretive dance, wine-pouring acrobatics, and one scene where a chorus of satyrs enter on invisible donkeys. It is, in short, exhausting. You glance at Dionysus. He's beaming. "I wrote this one. Mostly." "Of course you did." The ship drifts close enough for you to hear the chorus crooning about divine rejection and fermented heartbreak. They hold up large signs. Act 2, The Barley Incident, and Intermission, Please Clap. You do, out of pity and confusion. The stage crew bows. As you continue floating past, the actors leap one by one into the water and begin swimming after you, still reciting lines. One yells, "I am the embodiment of unearned confidence," before vanishing into a cloud of rose petals. You watch as the waves carry them away, their voices fading into the mist. "So," you ask Dionysus, "what was that about?" "Art, art, art." Historians still argue whether Dionysian theater began as a religious ceremony or a way to keep the goats from panicking during festivals. One prevailing theory suggests early drama was less about story and more about sensation, sound, rhythm, communal immersion. It was less Netflix, more ecstatic sleepover. You look back at the shrinking floating stage. It's now on fire, but cheerfully, like a campfire with opinions. Dionysus pats the deck. "We should keep moving. The sea's about to get dramatic." "Dramatic how?" He grins, like emotionally. "Oh no." The water darkens, not stormy, just moodier, more introspective. If a sea could wear a turtleneck and write poetry, this would be the moment. Suddenly, the ship lists to the left, and you scramble to grab a vine for balance. The dolphins vanish, as if unwilling to get involved. From the depths, an enormous bubble rises, then another. Then you see it. A whale. No, a really large whale, possibly mythical. Its skin glows faintly, covered in barnacles the size of dinner plates, and its eye, when it opens, is the size of your cabin window. The creature gives you a slow blink. You get the feeling it knows things. "You okay, buddy?" you ask, absurdly. The whale exhales a plume of glittering mist. "That's Cetus Minor," Dionysus says. "He cries during sad plays." "Oh, you'll like him." Cetus Minor surfaces fully, revealing a back so vast that it becomes its own stage. Tiny crabs perform a synchronized dance number, their little claws clicking in rhythm. You blink again. "That's adorable." "Told you." Historians are still unsure whether creatures like Cetus Minor were inventions of ancient seafarers or memories of real encounters with massive sea beasts, exaggerated by wine and fear. The Greeks certainly loved a sea monster. They show up everywhere, from Homer to Hellenistic doodles on pottery. But none of those sea monsters ever had interpretive crabs. The whale rolls gently in the waves, then dives again, sending a ripple through the water that carries your ship forward like a surfboard. As you right yourself, Dionysus hands you another goblet. "To the arts," he toasts. "To the weird arts," you reply. The wine this time tastes like backstage nerves and over-rehearsed lines, with a hint of time. Night continues to fold over the sea like a velvet curtain. The stars above burn brighter now, closer somehow. You trace constellations lazily with your finger. There's Orion, lopsided and slightly tipsy-looking. There's a new one you don't recognize, a lyre surrounded by grapes. The constellation of Melodious, Dionysus explains, seeing your gaze. Patron of drunk poetry slams. Of course. You recline on a vine hammock that wasn't there a minute ago. The ship is quiet again, except for the occasional bubble and distant sounds of crabs applauding. The god beside you sighs. We should get some rest. There's more absurdity tomorrow. You nod, eyelids heavy. Somewhere in your peripheral vision, a fish with a monocle salutes you. You're not even surprised anymore. The waves rock you gently, and the story drifts on. The morning dawns quietly, though morning here feels more like a gentle unfolding of a dream than the harsh reality of sunrise. You stretch your limbs and find the deck covered in a fine layer of dew, tiny droplets that shimmer like stars, even though the sky above is still a muted swirl of twilight colors. Somewhere nearby, a vine unfurls lazily, dripping with morning nectar that smells faintly of honey and forgotten secrets. Dionysus is already awake, perched like a sleepy cat on a coil of grapevines. He yawns, though the sound is more like the gentle rustling of leaves than any mortal sigh, and gestures at the horizon where a thick bank of fog hangs low over the water. "Time to visit a market," he says, voice still heavy with sleep but undeniably excited. A market on the sea? Why not? The sea's full of surprises, especially in myth. You nod, intrigued despite yourself. As the ship glides forward, the fog parts to reveal a bustling floating bazaar unlike any you've ever imagined. Stalls are anchored to massive lily pads, and vendors call out their wares in lilting melodies. There are baskets overflowing with shimmering fish that glow softly in the dim light, piles of exotic spices emitting tendrils of scent that curl around you like a warm blanket, and carts heaped with fruits that seem to pulse with their own internal light. You wander through the market, absorbing the atmosphere, the gentle chatter of bargain hunters, the clink of coins, the occasional burst of laughter that sounds like the tinkle of tiny bells. Every vendor is a curious creature, nymphs with hair like waterfalls, satyrs with mischievous grins, and even a pair of sea gods bartering over a particularly fine batch of seaweed bread. You stop at a stall where a wizened old woman offers you a cup of fermented honey wine. It tastes of sun-warmed orchards and soft laughter, something that instantly soothes your restless thoughts. As you sip, you notice a peculiar item hanging from the stall, a small, ornate box decorated with carvings of ivy and grape clusters. "Ah," the old woman says, noticing your interest. "That's the Box of Eternal Drunkenness. Not for actual use, of course, but it reminds us that sometimes it's better to lose yourself in joy than to cling too tightly to sobriety." You smile, the idea strangely comforting. Dionysus wanders over, inspecting the various spices with an expert eye. "Did you know," he says, "that ancient Greeks believed some spices could ward off bad dreams? Cinnamon and cloves, for instance. We're surrounded by dream-warding magic here." You nod thoughtfully, imagining the comfort such scents might bring on restless nights. Historians still argue whether the ancient Greek markets were truly as vibrant and diverse as the myths suggest, or if these tales grew richer with every retelling, like a fine wine aging over centuries. As the sun rises higher, the market begins to wind down. You watch as merchants pack up their stalls, and the floating bazaar slowly dissolves back into the mist from which it came, like a mirage retreating before the day. Back on the ship, Dionysus stretches his arms skyward, a lazy smile on his lips. "Markets are the heartbeat of any civilization," he muses, "even mythic ones." You lean against the railing, the gentle rocking of the ship lulling you into a calm reverie. The scents of spices still linger in the air, mingling with the salty tang of the sea and the sweet aroma of grapes. "Ready for the next part of the journey?" Dionysus asks. You nod, already feeling the weight of sleep pressing gently on your eyelids. The ship turns its bow toward the horizon, where new mysteries await, whispered on the winds and sung by the dolphins now returning to swim alongside. The story continues. The sea shifts again beneath your feet, not in anger or turbulence, but with the kind of elegant pivot a dancer makes between acts. The floating market fades like the echo of a dream, and in its place comes silence. Not empty silence, but full, like the hush inside a library or the breath before a blessing. You look to Dionysus. He's unusually quiet, not somber, just thoughtful, which, considering the source, feels significant. Ahead, rising from the sea like a half-forgotten memory, is a small island. It's not on any map, and it seems to rearrange itself as you approach. Trees change shape when you blink, paths appear, then vanish. One second you see a grove of pomegranates, the next it's an olive orchard in full bloom. The Isle of Mixed Memories, Dionysus murmurs. You arch an eyebrow. Is that like the brain's junk drawer? He chuckles. Exactly. Every forgotten myth, every half-told story, every misremembered name, it all ends up here. As the ship docks, or rather gently smushes itself into a carpet of mossy stones, you step off and immediately sink into a forest of sound. There are bird calls you've never heard before, wind that seems to hum a lullaby in an unfamiliar dialect, and a persistent giggling coming from a bush shaped like a teacup. You ignore it. Further along the path, you come across a peculiar monument, a statue of a man with the body of a lion holding a book upside down. Who is that, you ask? No one knows, Dionysus shrugs. Some scholars say it's Leontides the Forgettable, a philosopher who misquoted himself into obscurity. Others think it's just a very ambitious paperweight. The isle pulses with these curiosities. A tree with scrolls instead of leaves. A pond that reflects your childhood bedroom no matter who looks in. A boulder carved with the words, "This was important, we think." You sit beneath a fig tree and bite into one of its golden fruits. It tastes exactly like the smell of fresh laundry on a warm day. Comforting, uncomplicated, real. Did this place really exist, you ask Dionysus? He shrugs again, that trademark mix of nonchalance and mystery. Historians still argue whether certain islands mentioned in Greek myth, like Aea or Ogygia, were real places, metaphors, or simply wine-fueled metaphysical jokes. This one might be all three.
You stroll deeper into the isle, passing abandoned altars, mossy amphorae, and half-written poems carved into tree trunks. At one point, you trip over a lyre buried in the ground like a lost bone. You pick it up. It still hums faintly with music. Careful, Dionysus warns with a sly grin. That might have belonged to Orpheus's third cousin. Very bad taste in ballads, lots of minor keys. You laugh, the sound echoing through the trees and coming back at you slightly off-key. Time feels loose here, soft. You find yourself unsure if minutes or hours have passed. At a clearing near the center of the isle, you encounter an open-air theater. Unlike the floating one from earlier, this one is made of woven vines and petrified petals. A crowd of mythological misfits has gathered, dryads, selkies, one very serious-looking centaur taking notes. They part to let you pass, and at the center is a young woman in a gown made of feathers, reciting a monologue in an ancient dialect. You don't understand a word, but somehow you feel it, the ache, the joy, the odd hope tucked into every syllable. When she finishes, the crowd applauds, not with clapping, but with the rustling of leaves and a deep, collective sigh. It's the kind of applause only dreams receive. You and Dionysus return to the ship in silence, both lost in thought. Some myths don't need remembering, he says at last, but they still deserve to be dreamt. You nod, unsure if you'll ever remember this place when you wake,
or if you already visited it once in a dream from years ago. The island recedes behind you, sinking back into the folds of imagination. The sea stretches ahead, ready for the next chapter. You've grown used to the rhythm of this journey. Soft mornings, stranger afternoons, and mythic evenings that slip like silk through your fingers. As the Isle of Mixed Memories vanishes behind a veil of mist, Dionysus leans on the ship's railing and peers ahead. "Tell me," he says lazily, "have you ever attended a symposium?" You open your mouth, then pause. "Define attended." He smirks. "Perfect. Then you're ready." The ship shifts course, as if responding to his whims, and within moments you see it. A great marble pavilion floating atop the sea, its columns glittering with condensation and echoing with the clink of goblets and the low hum of half-hearted debates. This isn't just a party. It's an ancient Greek symposium, mythologized and exaggerated, of course. It floats here on the sea, as if Poseidon himself enjoys eavesdropping on philosophical tangents while sipping from a seashell. As you step aboard, a chorus of voices greets you. Poets lounging on pillows, musicians lazily plucking lyres, and a few deeply confused philosophers trying to argue whether boats are technically land-based creatures that lost their legs. Dionysus immediately makes himself at home. He produces a goblet of wine from behind his ear. Don't ask how, and gestures for you to do the same. "Relax," he says. "This is the part of the journey where we let ideas do the heavy lifting." You find a spot beside a philosopher wearing 2 togas and no sandals, who insists that dreams are merely recycled thoughts from previous lives. On your other side, a satyr attempts to explain why honey should be classified as both a liquid and a mood. It's all wonderfully confusing, and yet comfortingly so. Historians still argue whether ancient symposia were truly egalitarian forums of intellectual exchange or glorified excuses to drink under the stars. In truth, probably both, depending on how much wine was involved. You sip slowly, noticing that your goblet never seems to empty. The wine here is not overpowering. It's floral, gentle, like liquid lullabies. Across the pavilion, an impromptu poetry competition breaks out. One participant compares the moon to a peeled grape. Another insists love is like badly aged cheese, sharp, complicated, and prone to mold. Dionysus laughs so hard he nearly drops his goblet. "Did you know," he whispers conspiratorially, "that real symposia used to include flute girls, riddles, dancing, and occasionally very serious debates about whether beings were sentient? That last one can't be real." He winks. "Scholars have their suspicions." The air grows heady with incense and the warmth of shared absurdity. A chorus begins singing about Achilles' missing sandal, and you find yourself swaying to the rhythm, lulled by the sound of ancient nonsense and timeless questions. You're not entirely sure when the stars appeared, or how the sea turned to glass, reflecting every candle flickering in the symposium's many alcoves. Time melts. You close your eyes for a moment and open them to find Dionysus reclining on a couch beside you, now mid-argument with a small dog in a philosopher's hat. "You're not even Socratic," the god accuses, pointing a vine-wrapped finger. The dog growls softly. "Neither are you." You blink, rub your temples, and decide it's best not to interfere. The night drapes itself around your shoulders like a velvet cloak. Everything feels both deeply profound and wonderfully silly, as if all the wisdom of the world could be condensed into a sleepy pun or the last dregs of a goblet. Eventually, the philosophers begin to nod off. One curls up inside a scroll. Another uses his own sandal as a pillow. The sea breeze returns, tugging gently at the columns as if to say, "That's enough for now." Dionysus stands, stretches, and finishes the last drop of his wine. "Well then," he says, Let's leave them to their dreams. You return to the ship with the scent of spiced wine and rose petals lingering on your clothes, your thoughts soft and sticky like sweet syrup. The symposium disappears behind you, still buzzing with half-finished arguments and dreams that never quite made it to paper. Ahead lies more ocean and more myth. Dawn arrives not with fanfare, but with the gentle exhale of a sky that has finally decided to stretch. The sea glows pink and lavender, and even Dionysus seems quieter, less performative god, more contemplative cruise director. You lean against the rail, expecting another glittering monument or absurd floating island, but instead you see something altogether more domestic. Ahead lies a sleepy port town. Tiny clay-roofed homes cling to a hillside like barnacles, painted in faded yellows and dusty blues. Laundry flaps in the breeze. Somewhere, a rooster crows. And just past the harbor wall stands a crooked little inn called the Gilded Fig. "Time for a break," Dionysus says. "Even gods nap." You raise an eyebrow. "And what happens here?" He grins. Breakfast, gossip, and the single weirdest olive oil tasting in recorded meth. As the ship pulls up to the rickety dock, a portly man in a toga 3 sizes too small waves enthusiastically. His name is Tychon, self-declared innkeeper, olive oil sommelier, and part-time prophet, only on Thursdays. He greets Dionysus with a massive bear hug and ushers you both inside like long-lost family. The Gilded Fig smells like rosemary, grilled cheese, and faint regret. It is, in a word, perfect. You're seated at a low wooden table beside a fireplace, which seems to occasionally whisper compliments. The menus are etched onto dried fig leaves, and the house special is ambrosia pancakes with goat's cheese drizzle. You order 2. Tychon returns with a flight of olive oils, each poured into delicate glass cups as if they're rare vintages. "This one," he says, gesturing to a bright green swirl, "was blessed by a nymph mid-tantrum, adds a nice peppery finish." You nod seriously, sip it, and realize it tastes exactly like biting into a memory from your grandmother's garden, which is confusing since she lived in an apartment. Historians still argue whether ancient olive oil was truly essential to Greek life as records suggest, or if modern Mediterranean diets have just projected backwards. Either way, Dionysus says they definitely didn't have this one. He points to a cup glowing faintly purple. Tychon beams, infused with fig dreams and a dash of lunar dew. It tastes like a bedtime story. After breakfast, you wander the town, guided by a street map that looks suspiciously like a board game. Every square offers a different absurdity. The bath of eternal steam. You leave wrinkled but satisfied. The library of books that only whisper, mostly cookbooks, oddly. And the alley of the misfiled prophecies, where a man insists you're destined to invent the umbrella all over again. "Not interested," you mumble. But the most curious stop is the courtyard of old epithets. Here, engraved on stone benches and lampposts, are the cast-off nicknames of gods and heroes. Hermes the Overpacker, Athena the Midnight Snacker, Zeus, Lord of Misplaced Socks. "These are the bits the poets left out," Dionysus explains, running a hand over a weathered carving that reads, "Dionysus the Almost Punctual." You smile. It's strangely touching. The townsfolk greet you warmly, offering cups of honeyed water, small pouches of lavender, and unsolicited marriage proposals. You gently decline the last one. As evening rolls around, the square fills with laughter and fiddle music. Children chase a goat wearing a laurel crown. You decide not to ask. A woman with a cart full of sleeping cats hands you one to hold, for balance. The cat purrs like a lullaby engine. You sit beside Dionysus on a stone bench, watching the sky burn orange. The whole town hums with gentle, lived-in peace. No monsters, no epic quests, just a quiet day in a myth that no one bothered to write down. Not every tale needs a climax, Dionysus says, sipping wine from a mug that says, "World's okayest god." Some just want to be remembered, quietly. You look around, even here, in this absurd, sleepy hamlet, there's a kind of truth buried beneath the whimsy. These people, these tiny rituals, the olive oil tastings, the whispered recipes, the cats, it's all history in its softest form, the kind that lingers. And just as you're about to drift into a cheese-induced nap, Dionysus pats your shoulder. Time to go. There's still a pirate ship to disappoint. You chuckle, hand the cat back, reluctantly, and board the ship once more, the gilded fig slowly shrinking behind you like a memory that's fading just enough to become legend. The sea stretches before you again, calm and soft-edged, as though the waves themselves have been gently pressed under a warm blanket. The sails hum low lullabies as the ship glides forward, the sky ripening from coral dusk into rich indigo night. Dionysus appears at your side, once again barefoot, his hair suspiciously styled like someone who's recently walked through a hedge backwards. He's sipping something fizzy from a seashell. "Well," he says, "hope you didn't get too comfortable. We're headed into slightly stormier waters, emotionally speaking." You tilt your head. That's supposed to be ominous? He shrugs. Not unless you have unresolved feelings about musical theater and ancient maritime law. You don't, or at least not knowingly. The ship veers left with theatrical flair, and suddenly the ocean parts to reveal something odd, half submerged and utterly gleaming. A massive, spiraling amphitheater, built not on land, but rising out of the sea itself, like a stubborn memory. Water laps at its lowest tiers, and faint music echoes across the waves. Dionysus leans in. "Welcome to the sea stage, where myths come back to rehearse their worst decisions." Before you can ask what that means, the ship nestles gently beside the watery edifice and extends a gangplank. You cross over, noting that the marble is slick but warm beneath your feet. Amphora flirt lazily in the orchestra pit, and jellyfish serve as chandeliers, bioluminescent, disapproving, and silently judging your fashion choices. As you find a seat, cushioned, thankfully, a curtain of mist rises. The stage glows faintly, and a booming voice calls out, "Tonight's rehearsal, the trial of Dionysus, defendant in absentia for allegedly over-enthusiastic party behavior at sea." You glance at Dionysus, who's now munching grapes with a completely neutral expression. "I thought this was forgotten," he mumbles. Historians still argue whether Dionysian rites at sea ever truly caused shipwrecks, or if that's just what happens when you combine ancient wine with zero lifeboats. A chorus of dolphin-masked actors prance across the stage, dramatically reenacting a night when Dionysus, feeling underappreciated, turned an entire merchant vessel into a floating opera house. According to the performance, this involved converting sails into glitter capes and teaching tuna fish to harmonize. "You deny none of this?" the judge figure demands. Dionysus calls back, "I merely embellished reality into its better self." A pause, not a denial. The chorus breaks into a song titled "You Can't Conscript Dolphins," featuring interpretive splashing and a flute solo that sounds oddly like someone blowing into a reed too hard. It's objectively ridiculous, and kind of brilliant. You glance around. Other spectators have appeared, some mythical, some suspiciously mortal-looking. One ghost is knitting. A siren is taking notes. This rehearsal isn't polished, but it's intimate. It's as though the myths are trying to explain themselves, not to be exonerated, but just understood. You think back to the story itself, how pirates once tried to kidnap Dionysus, mistaking him for a wealthy mortal, and how he, without lifting a finger, turned their oars into snakes, filled the ship with vines, and transformed the men into dolphins. Not very chill, you whisper. Dionysus sighs. They tied me up. Rude. One of the dolphin actors turns to the audience and winks. In our defense, we were just trying to unionize. A modest laugh track plays, possibly from a hidden jar of enchanted crickets. The show meanders, like memory, and touches on themes you hadn't expected. The loneliness of immortality, the absurd pressure of symbolic storytelling, the tragic fate of side characters who only got one line in the old epics. A satyr attempts a soliloquy about the ethics of metamorphosis, gets distracted mid-sentence, and runs off stage chasing his own tail. The audience applauds anyway. Eventually, the judge declares the trial moot, emotionally complicated, and fundamentally allegorical. The mist curtain falls, the theater fades, and you, still giggling softly, rise from your seat and return to the ship. Dionysus tosses you a grape, which turns into a pearl midair and lands in your palm with a quiet plop. Next stop, he says, an actual pirate ship. Real rigging, real rum, real bad poetry. You arch an eyebrow. Better or worse than tonight's? He smirks. Depends how you feel about limericks. The ship sails on, the amphitheater sinking slowly into the waves behind you, leaving only ripples, and one very confused seagull reciting lines from Act 3.
The moon now rides high, casting a pale sheen across the water that makes everything, ship, sea, sky, look like it belongs to a dream you almost remember. Dionysus lounges across a deck chair that wasn't there 5 minutes ago, wrapped in a toga of silk that occasionally changes color when no one's looking directly at it. "All right," he says, tapping a goblet that refills itself with something vaguely mauve. "Let's go meet the pirates." You brace yourself for cannonballs, eye patches, maybe an angry parrot with unresolved trauma. Instead, you find poetry. The pirate ship approaches from the fog, all black sails and Baroque ornamentation. It's enormous, absurdly so, the sort of vessel that would make Poseidon roll his eyes and mutter something about overcompensation. Carved onto its bow in elegant lettering, "The Lyrical Kraken." Dionysus gives a satisfied nod. They're dramatic, but they know how to host. The ship pulls alongside yours. A thick, gold-plated gangplank is extended, entirely too glamorous for maritime crime. And you cross over to be greeted by a dozen pirates in billowing shirts, all reading from scrolls. One, clearly the leader, wears a feathered hat taller than most humans. "Welcome aboard," he shouts. "We're rehearsing for the annual ballad battle." You glance at Dionysus. "This is the ship that tried to kidnap you?" "Allegedly," he replies, inspecting a bowl of plums. "I maintain it was more of a strongly worded invitation." The captain, who introduces himself as Philomenes the slightly off-key, waves you forward. "You're just in time. Tonight's theme, mythological misunderstandings set to sea shanty rhythms." You're ushered into a main hall filled with nautical knickknacks, mood lighting, and a suspicious number of tambourines. Long tables are stacked with salted figs, honeyed eel bites, and barrels labeled simply, "Regret." You're handed a drink called Poseidon's Emotional Baggage and encouraged to take a seat. On stage, a pirate in sequined breeches performs a number titled, "Oh Dionysus, Why'd You Vine Me?" A heartfelt apology sung in falsetto with interpretive ribbon dancing. Historians still argue whether the tale of Dionysus and the dolphin pirates was meant to be moral instruction, metaphor for divine transformation, or just a bit of good old-fashioned nautical nonsense. You lean in. "Did you actually turn them into dolphins?" Dionysus shrugs. "Only the ones who didn't clap."
Back on stage, a trio of pirates break into a round of rhymed grievances. One complains about being turned into a sea mammal. One misses his boots, and the third admits he kinda liked it, but wishes he'd been consulted first. It is, somehow, deeply moving. The audience cheers. Dionysus tosses rose petals. Then it's your turn. Philomenes claps you on the back. All guests must perform. You protest. He hands you a scroll. You scan the lyrics. There once was a god with a goblet so wide. The music begins. You don't remember getting on stage, but here you are, singing, well, chanting mostly, about Dionysus's antics with an amphora of spiced mead, his brief stint as a duck, and his habit of haunting vineyards to give unsolicited fermentation tips. The pirates love it. One pirate weeps openly. Another throws you a bejeweled spoon. As the ballad ends, Dionysus rises dramatically. A toast, he declares, to poor decisions, better stories, and forgiving your kidnappers if their chorus work improves. Glasses are raised. Someone toasts the moon. Another toasts the concept of sequels. The ship begins to gently rock, not from waves, but from synchronized swaying. The pirates link arms and start humming a lullaby in a language you don't recognize. The rhythm is slow, oceanic, almost like breathing. One by one, pirates drift off, still upright like musical masts. Philomenes leans against the helm and starts writing something titled Ode to the God Who Brought Wine and Mild Closure. Dionysus pats your shoulder. See, not all divine retribution ends in thunderbolts. Sometimes it ends in interpretive dance and questionable snacks. As you walk back to your own ship, you glance over your shoulder at the lyrical kraken. It floats in place like a dream too elaborate to vanish entirely. The sea, once again, opens quietly before you. You recline against the ship's rail, salt air curling around your thoughts, still humming the last chorus from the pirate's ballad without meaning to. Dionysus leans beside you, arms folded behind his head, his expression soft in the moonlight. The ocean lies glassy beneath you, catching every star like it's hoarding them. You handled the dolphin opera and the pirate poetry surprisingly well, he says, teasingly. I've adjusted my expectations. That, he says, is the foundation of inner peace. Ahead, the water glows faintly, a wide stretch of sea lit from below by something neither sun nor moon. As your ship sails into this ethereal patch, you realize you're passing above a submerged city, perfectly preserved, glowing with blue-green luminescence, like a memory refusing to be forgotten. Dionysus murmurs, "This is where I got lost, long ago." The city below is quiet. Columns still stand tall, amphorae rest as if still waiting to be picked up, and fish swim through doorways that once led to temples. You can just make out murals on the walls, scenes of wine festivals, of masked dances, of someone who looks suspiciously like Dionysus holding court with mortals. This used to be Nysa, he says, almost to himself, or one of the Nysas. Nobody's sure how many there were. Historians still argue whether Nysa was a real place, a metaphor for divine intoxication, or simply a recurring typo in ancient maps. You squint down. It's underwater now? A fitting fate, he replies. Most of my favorite places eventually end up buried in wine, sand, or poor translations. The ship slows to a gentle drift, as though paying respects. You sit on the deck with your back against a barrel. Dionysus stays standing, watching the city below like an old friend he's not ready to greet. I came here before I was a god, he says, when I was still unsure. Mortals were easier to talk to then. They hadn't yet decided what I was supposed to be. You nod. You were human? Maybe, depends who you ask. Some say I was born twice, once from my mortal mother and once from the thigh of Zeus. He winks. Unusual gestation plan, but I'm told I turned out fine. Still, you say, must have been a lot. He nods. That's why I loved the sea. No temples to fuss over, no priests to correct me, no scrolls arguing whether my miracles were real or symbolic. Just salt, wind, and people who were too drunk to care if I was divine. The ship begins to move again, slow and respectful. You watch as Nysa fades beneath you, lost once more beneath the shimmer of sea and silence. Dionysus sits beside you and pulls from a pouch a strange little object, a carved figure of a satyr playing a pipe, no bigger than your thumb. "I found this here," he says, "before it sank. It used to sing if you held it just right." He turns it in his fingers, gently. No sound comes. "Why'd it sink?" you ask. He's quiet a long time before answering. "Too much joy, maybe, or not enough belief to keep it afloat." That hits in a strange spot. You glance at him. He catches your eye, smiles faintly. "Don't worry, joy always resurfaces somewhere." You look up. The stars have shifted again. The sea hums like a lullaby wrapped in fog. As you close your eyes, a faint echo rises from the deep. Not words, just melody. As though something below is still singing, still hoping someone will hear it. You awaken, or perhaps never quite slept, to the scent of pine needles and roasted barley. The ship is no longer surrounded by open sea, but gliding silently along a winding river. Trees rise tall and ancient on both sides, their reflections perfectly mirrored in the still water. Dionysus appears beside you, now wearing a garland of ivy and chewing thoughtfully on a sprig of fennel. "Welcome to Thrace," he says, voice muffled by the stem. "Land of strong opinions, stronger wine, and deeply questionable festival games." The river bends, revealing a village nestled among the hills. Thatched roofs peek through thick foliage, and a faint drumming thrums in the distance, slow, persistent, like a heartbeat trying to remember a song. Thrace was one of the first places to really embrace my entire personality, Dionysus continues. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. Let's just say the local kings didn't appreciate spontaneous orgies in the barley fields. You drift closer. The village appears deserted, but not abandoned. Clothes still hang from lines, amphoras sit neatly by doorways, and flower petals float in bowls of water. Historians still debate whether the rites of Dionysus practiced here were political resistance, spiritual awakening, or just a good excuse to dance until your sandals fell off. Your ship gently docks against a reed-covered bank. Dionysus hops off lightly, motions for you to follow. You step onto soft earth, greeted by the scent of damp moss and distant bread. A trail leads uphill, winding past carved stones and offerings long since weathered. Dried grapes, feathers, bronze tokens shaped like pomegranates. You reach a stone theater halfway up the slope, its tiers overgrown but still regal. At the center stands a figure, tall, robed in bark and vine, holding a staff carved with vines and panther tails. This is not Dionysus. This is a priestess. Or possibly a tree, or both. "Ah," Dionysus says with a sigh, "she's still here." The figure turns slowly toward you, revealing a face etched with time and pollen. She speaks in a voice like wind through bone-dry leaves. "You return, twice-born." Dionysus bows theatrically, only to borrow a little ambiance. She doesn't smile, but her eyes flicker with recognition. "The vines have missed your mischief." You sit on a mossy step. The priestess offers you a goblet filled with something that looks like wine but smells like earth and memory. You sip. Instant warmth. Hints of blackberry, thunder, and a secret you've almost remembered since childhood. "You taste the land," she says, nodding once. She begins to speak, not to you exactly, but to the grove itself, her voice weaving story and song. You understand pieces. A tale of a woman who laughed too loudly and was made into a tree. A stag who danced every solstice for 50 years until he dissolved into fog. A river that turned to wine every time someone told the truth under a full moon. Dionysus lies back on the grass. They thought they were honoring me with those stories, but really, they were inventing themselves. You listen as the priestess chants. The wind shifts and you hear other voices, soft, layered, overlapping. Women laughing, feet pounding in dance. A flute so high and sweet it could turn dew into honey. Then it fades. The priestess is gone, or never was. Dionysus stands. This land remembers things we forgot to write down. You look back down the trail. The village is still quiet, as though asleep under a spell of eternal festival, just one drumbeat away from waking. Back on the ship, as you sail away, you notice a vine coiled around the mast. A single grape hangs from it, ripe, shimmering. Don't eat that, Dionysus warns. You'll start speaking in riddles and hugging strangers. You stare at the grape a moment longer before stepping away. Better not risk it. You're already not entirely sure you exist in the same century as you did when this journey began. As the river opens into the sea once more, the air shifts, lighter, sweeter, filled with the faint, far-off scent of figs roasting somewhere you'll never quite find. The sun, or something very much like it, hangs low over the sea as your ship glides back into open water. The sky has that peachy late-afternoon glow that makes everything look like it's been painted in warm honey. Dionysus stretches like a cat in a sunbeam and yawns, then casually drapes a garland over your shoulders without asking. "Compliments of the hour," he says. "You're officially part of the entourage now." You glance down. The garland is made of odd little things: thyme sprigs, olive leaves, and what appears to be a small button carved with a lion's face. "Welcome to the age of heroes," Dionysus adds, gesturing broadly at the horizon. Or rather, the age of people who claimed they were heroes because they once shouted at a cloud and the cloud moved. You're drifting toward a small island, jagged and wild-looking, surrounded by seabirds that caw lazily as they circle overhead. There's no beach, just cliffs that seem to argue with the sky. "This," he says, "is where I may or may not have punched Theseus. Depends who you ask." "Wait, the guy with the minotaur?" "The very one," Dionysus says, frowning as the island comes closer. "Bringer of drama, abandoner of princesses, wearer of sandals with too many straps." The ship finds a narrow inlet and glides in. You anchor beside a gnarled olive tree, clinging to a rock like it's trying to escape. You hike up a steep path. Dionysus tells the story as you go, casually flicking pebbles at the goats watching from above. So, Theseus sails off from Athens, says he's going to Crete to kill the Minotaur. Fine, hero stuff. Then he meets Ariadne. Clever, devoted, gives him a ball of string and a way out. You dodge a thorn bush. Let me guess, he dumps her? Oh, spectacularly, on this very island. Left her asleep on a rock. No note, not even a text. You reach a flat plateau at the top where the view is breathtaking. The sea in all directions, sun glinting like gold coins scattered by an ancient banker with bad impulse control. "She cried for days," Dionysus continues. "Then I arrived, quite by accident. Well, divine accident. My ship drifted here after a particularly enthusiastic moonlit festival. I saw her and, well, she saw me. What happened?" He shrugs. "We talked about myths and men and how sandals really aren't a proper substitute for emotional maturity." The breeze picks up. You sit on the edge of a sun-warmed rock. Dionysus sits beside you, quieter now. "Some say I married her here, gave her a crown that became a constellation. Historians still argue whether that's romantic or just strategic public relations." You look up. The sky is beginning to shift, stars barely peeking out. "So what happened to her?" "She lived, he says simply, laughed again, ate figs, wrote poetry that nobody preserved. You sit in silence. The only sound is the wind, soft and insistent, threading through the olive trees. Then Dionysus stands and says, "Let's go see the goats. They know things." You blink? The goats? Wise beyond their bleats. You trail him to the ridge, where several goats are perched like judgmental statues. One ambles up and nudges Dionysus in the hip. He pats it like an old friend. This one once headbutted a Spartan general. Long story. You try to pet the goat, but it stares you down like it knows your browser history. Eventually, you return to the ship. The wind is stronger now, sea mist curling like whispered secrets. Dionysus leans against the rail. "You know," he says, "some myths say I rescued Ariadne. Others say I was never here. Some even suggest she became a goddess on her own, no man needed." He smiles. That's the beauty of myth. It reshapes around whatever you most need it to be. You look back once more at the island. There's no sign of Ariadne or Theseus or the goats. Just rocks, wind, and a place where someone might once have turned heartbreak into stardust. You wake to the scent of roasted pine nuts and a soft melody drifting across the waves, plucked lyre strings maybe, or just the sea making music with itself. Dionysus is already up, casually balancing a clay jug on one shoulder and a fig in his mouth. "Time for a party," he announces around the fig. But don't worry, it's a very old party, the kind that's been going on for about 1,000 years. You sit up slowly. The ship is gliding into a port city that doesn't look entirely real. Its columns are lopsided, its statues cracked with time, and yet the whole place gleams with a golden hue like everything's been polished with beeswax and nostalgia. "Welcome to Naxos," Dionysus says, gesturing grandly, "home of festivals, foot races, and some truly chaotic flute solos." You disembark onto smooth stones worn by centuries of sandaled feet. The city hums with life, vendors calling out the price of fermented honey cakes, children chasing each other with wreaths of bay leaves, old men debating loudly under olive trees. "And right over there," Dionysus says, pointing with his fig, "is where they used to hold the Dionysia." He leads you to a crumbling amphitheater carved into a hill. Vines snake around the stone seats, and faded paint still clings to parts of the stage wall. Historians still debate whether this was the original site or just a particularly enthusiastic replica, Dionysus explains, but either way, the performances here were unforgettable. You step onto the stage. It's quiet, save for the distant drone of cicadas. Dionysus begins to narrate as if you're the only audience left. They performed tragedies, of course. Big masks, big gestures, lots of shouting at the gods. But also comedies, absolutely filthy stuff, full of puns about figs and donkeys. Honestly, you'd be surprised how many ancient punchlines involved donkeys. He walks the edge of the stage, arms outstretched. And this is where the chorus would stand. Dozens of people in matching robes, dancing and chanting in rhythm, like a really judgmental flash mob. You imagine the scene, a warm night, torches flickering, the scent of myrrh and spilled wine in the air. The chorus moves in unison, their voices echoing off the marble, while the audience cheers, laughs, sometimes weeps. "Here's the best part," Dionysus says, eyes glinting. The audience wasn't always sober. In fact, they were very often extremely not. He plucks a grape from a nearby vine, pops it into his mouth. The Dionysia was more than theater. It was a kind of collective dream. Citizens, slaves, foreigners, they all packed into the theater, shoulder to sweaty shoulder, and for a few days pretended the world made sense. You sit on the stone bench and close your eyes. You can hear them now, the murmurs, the shouts, the pounding of feet as the chorus moves. And the prize, Dionysus continues, a wreath of ivy, sometimes a small goat. Mostly it was glory.
Or at least bragging rights at the agora. You crack an eye open. They performed for a goat? He nods solemnly. A sacred goat, with a very judgmental stare. You both laugh. The sound echoes in the ancient space. Eventually, the sun begins to lower, and the amphitheater is bathed in amber light. "Did I tell you I invented theater?" Dionysus asks suddenly. "Of course you did. Well, me and a few overly dramatic shepherds, but yes, you are welcome." You rise, dusting off your tunic. The city below still buzzes, and a festival seems to be brewing. Musicians tuning up, flags rising along balconies, laughter beginning to swell. As you walk back to the ship, you notice something strange. The air is thicker now, sweet with incense and stories. Every doorway you pass is lit by a small lamp, each casting shadows that dance a little too purposefully. You reach the harbor. Dionysus pauses before boarding. "Theater," he says, "is the only place where lies tell the truth." Then he winks and steps aboard, the jug still perched on his shoulder like a sleepy cat. Back on the ship, you find a small note tucked into your sandals. It smells faintly of rosemary and ambition. The handwriting is loopy, as if written by someone who had far too much wine and absolutely no regrets. It reads, "To Delos, the floating island. Bring sandals with grip. Love, D." You look up to find Dionysus steering the ship himself, which is mildly alarming given his history with focus. He waves the note at you with one hand and points at the horizon with the other. "To Delos," he proclaims, as if you had a say in the matter, "birthplace of Apollo and Artemis, where nothing ever stands still, including the island itself." The sea is calm today, glassy and wide, but you feel a tingle in the air, as though the waters know you're headed to a place that once defied geography. Dionysus leans against the mast. "You know, Delos didn't used to be there. It just showed up, floating around like a bored goose until it found its spot." You frown. "Floating?" "Yes, floating. Because Hera, ever the fan of petty sabotage, refused to let Leto give birth on solid land. So Zeus, in a rare moment of problem-solving that didn't involve lightning bolts, made Delos float." You stare at the horizon. "So this whole island is just mythical loophole real estate?" "Exactly," he grins. "A divine workaround. Honestly, I respect it." The ship glides into a quiet bay. The island is windswept, dotted with whitewashed ruins and long grasses that rustle like old secrets. It feels quieter than the others, almost sacred, but not in a flashy way, more like a place that remembers every whisper it's ever heard. You walk inland. The path winds through half-toppled columns and a sun-bleached theater where the only audience now is a flock of indifferent seabirds. "This," Dionysus says, gesturing to a cluster of shrines, "was once the most important religious center in the Aegean. Pilgrims came from all over to honor Apollo. And yet," he pauses, smirking, "I once upstaged him here." You raise an eyebrow. "Oh yes," he continues. "There was a festival, a big one. Apollo's priests were doing their whole golden lyre, hymn to the sun routine, very shiny, very look at me, I control light. And then I arrived." He spreads his arms dramatically, with a ship made of ivy, a chorus of dolphins, and a full brass section. You blink. Brass? Well, clay trumpets. But still, the point stands. You stroll past a statue missing its head, but somehow still looking haughty. Dionysus sighs. "Historians still argue whether my arrival marked a shift in worship or just a particularly memorable hangover." You pause at a sacred pool, now just a shallow dip where frogs have claimed dominion. Dionysus crouches to watch one, his expression oddly soft. "Delos," he says, "was always about contradictions. Birthplace of gods, and yet banned from deaths for centuries. No one could die here. Imagine that! An island where time ticks but never tolls. He tosses a pebble into the pool. It skips once, then sinks with a glop. Eventually, things changed, he continues. Politics, power shifts, earthquakes, the usual. Delos became a trading hub, then a memory. You sit beside a crumbling altar, its carvings worn into almost suggestions. The wind moves through the grasses like it's telling a joke only the statues remember. And now, Dionysus adds with a grin, people come here to feel something ancient, or at least take dramatic vacation photos. He plucks a daisy from between two stones, tucks it behind your ear. There, he says, now you look appropriately sacred. You smile. The sun is dipping low, and everything takes on that hazy gold tone again, like the island is slipping back into myth before your very eyes. As you make your way back to the ship, the air thickens with sea spray and anticipation. Dionysus hums a tune you don't recognize, minor key, almost lullaby-like, and adds, "They say Apollo's lyre could calm storms, but me, I prefer stories, stickier than songs, harder to lose." The ship pulls away from Delos, the floating island that once made room for a mother with nowhere else to go. You watch it shrink behind you, a stubborn dot on the sea, until the stars come out and the water turns dark and smooth as velvet. Night falls gently, as if the stars themselves are tucking you in. You lie on the deck, the sails flapping softly overhead, while the moon casts lazy silver streaks across the water. Dionysus is reclined nearby, balancing a fig on his forehead like it's a medal. "You know," he begins, "there's a kind of peace to the open sea. Until, of course, you get kidnapped." You glance at him. "Not me," he clarifies, shifting the fig slightly. "Well, actually, me, yes, but it worked out." You sit up, your curiosity piqued. "This wouldn't happen to be the pirate ship story, would it?" He grins. "Ah, finally. The wine-fused argument with a pirate ship. A classic." The ship rocks gently as the memory sets in around you like a dream thick with salt and laughter. "It started," Dionysus says, "because I was in disguise, a beautiful youth wandering along the coast of Icaria. You know, tousled hair, a dramatic robe, the whole divine incognito bit. You picture it. He's probably underselling the drama. Now," he continues, "a group of Tyrrhenian pirates spotted me. Big lads, lots of earrings. Thought I was just some rich, clueless noble they could ransom. I, of course, played along, mostly because I wanted to finish my olives." He plucks a phantom olive from the air and pops it into his mouth. "They ushered me onto their ship, nicely at first, but then it turned into a bit of a shove. I didn't say much, just smiled. They got suspicious pretty quickly." You nod, "because you're you." "Exactly," he says, clearly pleased. "They tried to tie me up, but the ropes wouldn't hold, just sort of slipped off like I'd been buttered. One of them muttered that I smelled like myrrh. Another said I might be a god. The captain laughed and told them to focus on the ransom." He leans in conspiratorially. Historians still argue whether these pirates were just exceptionally unlucky or whether I planned it all from the start. You ask, "Did you?" "I plead the fifth amphora," he replies, raising an imaginary goblet. You try to imagine it. A group of hardened seafarers on a stolen ship with their captive reclining like he owns the place. And then the ship begins to change. Dionysus nods. First, the mast sprouted ivy. The sails turned into grapevines. Clusters of ripe, sticky fruit dropped onto their heads like divine raisins of judgment. He snickers. And then, he says, the music started. The deck beneath your feet seems to hum with it, a low, ancient rhythm that tastes faintly of drums and wild dancing. They couldn't tell where it came from, he goes on. The sea, the wood, their own hearts. One of them started laughing and couldn't stop. Another tried to jump overboard, but slipped on a bunch of grapes. You really can't write better comedy. You raise an eyebrow. Did any of them get away? Ah, Dionysus says, reclining again, here's the fun part. The captain tried to run me through with his sword. The blade turned into a fennel stalk mid-swing, confusing for everyone involved. He gazes up at the stars. Then I transformed. Not slowly either. One moment, charming hostage. Next moment, full god mode. Laurel crown, staff of madness, cloak made of leopards. You should have seen their faces. He chuckles. And then the real argument began. Not words, reality itself began to disagree with them. The sea got choppy, but only on one side of the ship. The wood wept wine. The rigging turned into snakes. You blink. That escalated. I am the god of escalation, he says modestly. Eventually, the pirates panicked, tried to flee, but the ship wasn't having it. It shuddered and twisted and, according to Dionysus, sang. Then, he adds, they began to change. Your stomach tightens. Into dolphins? Into dolphins, he confirms. Graceful, frolicking, kind of smug dolphins. I let them keep their memories, though. Every now and then, if you're near Icaria, you'll see them nudging fishing boats, trying to trade clams for forgiveness. You both fall quiet. The waves lap against the hull like sleepy applause. That ship, Dionysus says after a pause, became my temple for a while. Floating, vine-wrapped, eternally drifting. People would come aboard, leave offerings, wake up with hangovers and epiphanies. He rolls onto his side. The pirates weren't evil, just opportunistic. Wrong place, wrong divinity. Happens. You close your eyes. The image of a vine-wrapped ship drifting endlessly across the Aegean lulls you into a dreamy stillness. Above, the stars wheel slowly. Somewhere beneath, dolphins laugh in a way that's suspiciously human. The ship sails on into the early dawn, the sky turning from inky black to the soft lavender of a fresh thought. You lie still, lulled by the ship's rhythm and Dionysus's occasional snore, though it's unclear whether he's asleep or just trying to harmonize with the creaking wood. Eventually he stirs, stretches like a cat, and announces, "Right, it's time to visit someone even more dramatic than me." You groan. More dramatic than the god of drama? Oh yes, he grins. Orpheus, the original sad boy with a lyre. Let's go find out how he ruined his own love story with too much music. You soon arrive at a small rocky island, half covered in mist, half in wildflowers. The shore has no dock, only a series of steps carved into pale stone, as if the island only allows arrivals by effort. You climb. At the top stands a modest amphitheater, open to the sky. Sitting dead center is a statue of a man with a lyre, his face frozen in an expression that's somewhere between longing and artistic constipation. That's him, Dionysus says. Orpheus. Could make a rock cry, literally, and did, several times. You sit on the edge of the stage, brushing moss from a broken column. So, what's the deal with him, you ask? Dionysus lies back with his arms folded behind his head. He was immortal, sort of. His dad might have been a Thracian king or Apollo himself, depending on which bard you ask after 3 cups of wine. You nod. Standard myth identity confusion. Indeed. But everyone agrees on this. Orpheus was the best musician in the world. Trees leaned toward him. Rivers stopped flowing just to hear a chorus. Even Hades tapped a foot. You laugh. Seriously? Historians still argue whether Hades actually liked music or just admired the sheer nerve of Orpheus for showing up uninvited. You lean in, intrigued.
Eurydice, Dionysus says, his tone softening. That's what broke him. She died on their wedding day, snakebite. Honestly, there should be more warning signs around ancient meadows. You think of the frogs on Delos. Snakes could have been anywhere. Orpheus didn't cry like most men. He sang, and the song was so devastating that the gods sent birds to weep over his shoulder. Apollo might have ghost-written a verse or two, but that's unconfirmed. Dionysus turns his head toward you. Eventually, Orpheus did what no one else dared. He went to the underworld. Not to escape death, but to argue with it. You imagine it, a young man with a lyre, walking calmly past Cerberus, whose 3 heads are too busy humming to bite. He didn't fight monsters, Dionysus continues, didn't bribe anyone. He just played, and it worked. Hades and Persephone, touched by the music, agreed to let Eurydice go, on one condition. You nod. He couldn't look back until they were both out. Dionysus sighs. And he did, right at the last step.
You close your eyes. You've heard this part before, but it feels different here, under an open sky where the echoes of his song might still cling to the stone. They say he doubted she was really there, or that he couldn't resist the poetic tension of a backward glance. Or maybe, Dionysus adds with a shrug, he just tripped. The myths are vague. You picture it, Eurydice behind him, silent, trusting, and then gone. What happened to him after, you ask? Oh, he swore off women, Dionysus replies, joined an all-male cult, lived in the mountains, grew a beard full of secrets. He pauses. But his end, not great. You raise an eyebrow. Worse than Eurydice vanishing into the dark forever? Well, the Maenads tore him apart, he says cheerfully. One of those mortal gets too famous for his own good endings. Classic. You wince. But, Dionysus continues, his lyre became a constellation, and his head, apparently, floated down a river singing for days. Bit much, if you ask me. Still, it's the kind of tragedy you can fall asleep to, isn't it? You smirk. Sure, nothing more relaxing than eternal heartbreak and severed heads that hum lullabies. Exactly, Dionysus says, stretching luxuriously. Myths are just bedtime stories with worse consequences. The sun creeps higher, warming the ancient stones. You swear you hear a faint string of music on the breeze, minor key, full of longing, but somehow restful. You and Dionysus sit in silence, letting the echoes fade. The flowers sway in time with something only they can hear. And then, softly, you rise. Time to move on. The amphitheater of Orpheus fades behind you, the island slipping away into the fog as quietly as it appeared. Dionysus doesn't say much at first. He's chewing on a grapevine, seemingly lost in thought, and you decide not to press. After all, one does not rush a god digesting melancholy and fruit at the same time. Eventually, he perks up. All right, he says, brushing invisible dust from his tunic. We've done drama, music, and tragic romance. How about something mundane for a change? Something perfectly boring and deeply Greek. You nod. That actually sounds great. Let's talk about dinnerware, he says with a smirk. You blank? Plates? Exactly. Plates, cups, spoons. Well, okay, not spoons. Greeks weren't too keen on spoons. But let's just say you're about to learn more about ancient table manners than any mortal has asked for in the last 2 millennia. You're transported, not by portal, not by boat, but simply by scene change, to a modest household in 5th century BCE Athens. It's just after sunset. You're seated on a cushioned couch, leaning sideways, like a weary philosopher who's had too much diluted wine. There's no dining table. Instead, small mow tables hold clay dishes of olives, cheese, dried figs, and something that looks suspiciously like fermented fish paste. Dionysus lounges next to you, casually plucking grapes off a vine that seems to grow only when he looks at it. So, he says between bites, this is a symposium, technically, though this one's a little less debauched than usual. You look around. It's a dinner party? Yes, but with rules, he says. The wine is always mixed with water. Always. Only barbarians drink it straight. It's about pace, not potency. You eye the crater, a wide ceramic mixing bowl, and notice the small cups being passed around. They used kylixes, Dionysus explains, gesturing toward the shallow cups. Flat, elegant, fragile. Not ideal for gulping. Perfect for sipping while pretending to listen to poetry. One of the other guests, a thin man in a too large robe, clears his throat and begins reciting a poem about the moon's loneliness. You try not to giggle. Dionysus doesn't try at all. Anyway, he whispers, table manners were a thing, sort of. Don't bring your own food, don't insult the host's gods, and never, ever criticize the flute player. A young woman begins to play the aulos, a twin-reeded instrument that sounds somewhere between a kazoo and a distressed duck. See, Dionysus smirks, flawless. You stifle a laugh and focus on the food. The bread is flat, hard, and likely designed to test dental commitment. The cheese is strong enough to qualify as a minor deity. Still, there's a rhythm to the meal. Passing, dipping, laughing, the communal flow. They didn't have forks, Dionysus adds, watching you awkwardly use your fingers to chase an olive across a plate. Just knives, and the occasional two-pronged spiat. Everything else? Hands, friend. Greasy, glorious hands. You nod solemnly, as if receiving sacred knowledge. They also didn't talk about food like we do now, he continues. No one said things like hints of rosemary or earthy undertones. Food wasn't about ego, it was fuel, with occasional flair. You observe the cook in the corner, an older woman with arms like tree trunks, calmly roasting something over coals while shooing away a chicken with her foot. She looks completely unbothered by the presence of a god and a time traveler at her gathering. There were specialties, though, Dionysus continues. Seafood, lentils, barley, and they loved honey. Put it on everything, including bugs sometimes, for texture, allegedly. You raise an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether cicada skewers were a delicacy or a dare, he says, licking honey from his fingers. As the meal winds down, conversation drifts toward politics and philosophy. Someone begins a speech about the virtues of silence. Another starts composing an ode to fig trees. Dionysus interrupts with a toast so meandering and odd that it becomes a philosophical exercise of its own. You get it, right? He murmurs to you between refills. The symposium wasn't just a party. It was a social experiment, a theater of ideas, half lecture hall, half wine bar. You nod, watching a man balance a plum pit on his nose. And the dinnerware? Oh, right. He waves his hand. Everything was painted. Black figure or red figure ceramics. They didn't just eat from their art, they told stories with it. Dionysus, yours truly, was a popular theme. He points to your cup. Sure enough, a tiny painted Dionysus is dancing with satyrs around the bowl's inside edge. Functional fan art, you mutter. Exactly, he says. You drain your wine and boom, there I'd be. Surprise. The guests begin to drift toward reclining pillows, full and fuzzy from the evening's fare. A flute player is asleep on her instrument. Someone's snoring an iambic pentameter. You lie back, staring up at the stars through a square window in the roof. So, Dionysus says, yawning, was that boring enough for you? Oddly soothing, you reply. Excellent, he says, conjuring a last grape and popping it in his mouth. Now, let's go somewhere more chaotic. And with that, the symposium dissolves like honey and warm wine. When the symposium dissolves, it does so in the most literal way possible. Clay plates crumbling into dust, wine evaporating mid-air, and dinner guests folding like linens into the breeze. You don't even stand up. One moment, you're lying back on a plush cushion. The next, you're on the deck of another boat, bobbing gently on a mist-slick sea.
Dionysus, as ever, is unbothered. He's replaced his grapevine crown with a floppy fisherman's hat and has conjured a rod from somewhere. He casts it into the ink-dark water with no bait. "We're drifting into myth again," he says, "but not mine exactly. This one's older, wilder, more fishy." You wait, still adjusting to the shift in tempo. There's no land in sight, just soft waves and a pale moon that doesn't seem to cast shadows. "So," he continues, "have you ever heard of Glaucus?" You shake your head. "Perfect," he says. "Time to meet the patron saint of absolutely terrible seafood decisions." You lean back as the mist thickens again, this time shaping into a jagged shoreline, where a bearded fisherman crouches over his catch. You're suddenly beside him, watching the scene unfold. Dionysus sits nearby, peeling an orange. We're in ancient Boeotia now, not a tourist hotspot, but let's not be snobs. Glaucus is muttering to himself. He's got a decent haul of fish, but something's bothering him. He pulls up a patch of grass, sprinkles it over the fish, and they start flopping back to life. That, Dionysus says with a grape-sized smirk, is your first clue he's not destined for a quiet retirement. Glaucus blinks at the fish. Then, in an inspired moment that historians still argue over, he decides to eat the grass himself. You blink too. Why? Well, Dionysus says, some say it was curiosity. Others say divine madness. Personally, I think he was just really competitive with his dinner. The moment Glaucus swallows the magical herb, his body begins to change. His legs fuse into a tail. Scales spread across his skin. His beard becomes seaweed-like. And with a startled yelp, he dives headfirst into the sea. There's a long pause. Does he regret it, you ask? Oh, endlessly, Dionysus replies. He becomes a sea god, sure, immortal, all that. But he also loses his humanity. He floats through legend like kelp through currents, half forgotten, half feral. The scene shifts again. Glaucus now swims among the Nereids, who mostly ignore him, and harbors a tragic crush on the nymph Scylla, who does not reciprocate. He's basically the original sad merman, Dionysus says, heartbroken, confused, and constantly monologuing about fish. No one invited him to underwater parties. The imagery fades as Glaucus drifts into murky waters reciting poetry to barnacles. You know, Dionysus muses, some believe he was a fisherman, others a sailor, others a minor king. Even the gods couldn't agree. But isn't that what makes a myth? Layers of misremembering. You glance overboard and catch a glimpse of Glaucus staring up at you through the waves. He gives a solemn nod and swims away. What's the moral, you ask? Dionysus stretches, the fishing line vanishing into sparkles. Don't eat random herbs you find on the beach. Or maybe, if you do, don't expect applause. You're about to reply when the boat bumps against something. No sound, just a gentle shudder. You look over the edge and find yourself staring at a forest, a floating forest. Mossy trees rising from shallow waters, lanterns bobbing among the reeds, frogs croaking in Homeric hexameter, if your ears can be trusted. "What now?" you whisper. "Now," says Dionysus, stepping off the boat onto a root, "we visit Hecate's garden, and maybe meet her three-headed dog. Don't worry, only one of the heads bites." You follow, ducking beneath low branches, your footsteps muffled by moss and mist. The sea god's tale lingers in your thoughts, the loneliness, the whimsy, the weirdness of a man-turned-myth. Somewhere far below, Glaucus hums a sea shanty to himself, hoping, perhaps, that someone remembers him. Tonight, someone does. Mist curls through the flowing forest like a cat that owns the place, and you follow Dionysus along a spongy path lit by lantern bugs, little green orbs that blink in sync with your heartbeat. Somewhere deeper in the trees, something large hoots, then politely coughs as if embarrassed. You keep moving. Up ahead, a clearing opens around a black glass pool.
Floating above it, because gravity is a suggestion here, are 3 flickering campfires shaped like theatrical masks: comedy, tragedy, and that awkward middle face that can't decide. Around them lounge ghostly figures in kingly robes, translucent crowns tilted at regretful angles. Dionysus stops short, fingers to lips in a mock shush. "Eavesdropping time," he whispers. "These are the monarchs who thought it clever to heckle a god." You edge closer. The first specter adjusts an ermine cloak despite having no solid shoulders. You recognize him from half-remembered theater class, King Pentheus of Thebes, infamous for outlawing Dionysian rites. His voice is brittle as old papyrus. "I only wanted order," he laments. "People were dancing, shouting, wearing vines they had no permit for." From the other side of the pool, a second figure snorts, King Lycurgus of Thrace, the one who tried to axe the god's sacred vines. He still clutches an invisible weapon. It keeps dissolving into flowers. "Order? You confiscated their tambourines? That's how revolutions start." He sighs. "My horses went mad, and I ended up hugging a rock. So that's something." Dionysus leans toward you, stage whispering. Mainstream historians put Pentheus and Lycurgus on every syllabus as cautionary tales of hubris, kings who banned joy and got poetic justice, courtesy of yours truly. You nod, recalling the real tragedies. In Euripides' Bacchae, Pentheus is torn apart by his own mother. Lycurgus loses kingdom, mind, and eventually life to vine-born vengeance. Heavy stuff, but right now the kings just look like overworked middle managers swapping disaster stories at an existential water cooler. A third specter glides in, wearing donkey earmuffs. You blink. King Midas, the Golden Touch guy, though here he seems more concerned with a different curse, Apollo's gift of embarrassing donkey ears for daring to judge a music contest. He tugs the muffs self-consciously. "I got off lucky," he confesses. "At least I kept my limbs and discovered hats." Pentheus scoffs. "Try being dismembered by aunts on a hillside." Midas raises one spectral eyebrow. "Try turning everything you kiss into solid bullion. Absolutely ruined my dating life." Lycurgus sighs again. "Try hallucinating grapevines strangling your horses." They all nod, unified in cosmic customer support trauma. You settle on a mossy log that politely offers extra cushioning. Dionysus remains standing, twirling a myrtle sprig like a pointer. "Note the pattern," he murmurs. "Each thought they could regulate ecstasy, and each got a tailored tragedy. One size never fits all, except vines. They fit everything." Across the pool, a faint projector-like shimmer begins rolling highlights of their greatest errors. Pentheus spying on wild maenads in full disguise, only to be spotted because he can't resist commentary. Lycurgus hacking at phantom vines until the vines hack back. Midas, ears hidden under a flop hat, judging Pan's reed whistle superior to Apollo's golden lyre, an opinion some modern indie critics might still share. You smell roasted barley on the wind, Hecate's garden snacks, and it blends with the pool's briny aroma, creating what you dub regret-scented air freshener. Even the lantern bugs blink slower, as if savoring schadenfreude. Dionysus clears his throat, loud enough that the kings freeze mid-whine. Their faces drain, figuratively and literally, color seeping out like watercolor in rain. "Gentlemen," Dionysus announces, "annual performance review. Let's revisit your KPIs, key Pentheus indicators, king performance indexes, and so forth." Pentheus stammers. Lycurgus clenches transparent fists. Midas adjusts his earmuffs for moral support. You whisper, "Isn't this a bit cruel?" Dionysus shrugs. "They're already legends. Besides, self-reflection is very sleep-inducing. Watch."
He snaps his fingers. The pool turns into a mirror, showing each monarch their worst moment on loop. Pentheus's terrified eyes before the Maenads descend. Lycurgus swinging at shadows. Midas gasping as his dinner plate petrifies mid-bite. Quirky tidbit. A tiny amphipod pops out of the water wearing a laurel crown, waves a miniature theatrical program, then backflips. Proof even crustaceans crave drama. The kings groan. Midas tries to nibble the edge of the mirror, perhaps hoping it will turn to gold and redeem his portfolio. No luck. Historians still debate whether these myths originated as pre-existing folk warnings or were crafted by playwrights to boost festival ticket sales, Dionysus notes to you, almost academically. I'm flexible on origin stories. The moral's the same. Respect the grape. You chuckle, but there's genuine pathos in the clearing now. Pentheus clutches his reflection, voice breaking. I wanted discipline, not carnage. Lycurgus mutters, I feared disorder. Armies need order. Midas whispers, I feared poverty and overshadowing musicians with money. Dionysus's expression softens. He waves a hand, and the harsh images soften, morphing into lighter scenes. Villagers dancing safely, vines adorning temples without strangling livestock, gold coins funding music schools. Lesson logged, he says. Off you go. With that, the specters fade like candle smoke. Only faint outlines linger, then nothing. The forest sighs in relief. Even the frogs resume hexameter, though now they recite a gentler meter. Call it drowsy dactylic. Dionysus sits beside you, shoulders slumping. Punishment scenes always drain me, he admits. People think gods enjoy smiting. Boring, honestly. You remember the underwater Nysa, the goats with wisdom, the pirate ballads. You give people chances, you say. He grins sideways. And stories. Can't forget the stories. A vine coils around a nearby branch, sprouting 3 grapes, one for each king. They shimmer like distant stars, then burst into harmless puffs of sweet-smelling mist. The clearing brightens, then dims, settling into a perfect hush. Overhead, Hecate's lanterns bob lower, casting warm light that paints sleepy gold over bark and leaf. You feel your eyelids droop, the croak rhythm soothing as lullaby drums. Dionysus pats your arm. Sleep if you need. The next tale is lighter. Think parody weddings and musical donkeys. You laugh quietly, already half dreaming. Somewhere in the distance, a goat bleats the opening notes of a comedy overture. The floating forest drifts, the mirror pool returns to calm water, and the god beside you hums a soft, wandering tune, part sorrow, part absolution, entirely hypnotic. You let it carry you. The clearing behind you dissolves into hush and shadow as Dionysus rises again, brushing a few stray vine leaves from his tunic. He glances back once, just once, at the place where 3 very different kings once brooded beside a talking pond, then motions for you to follow. This time, the forest opens wide. The vines pull back like drapes on a stage, and ahead lies something utterly unexpected. A glittering meadow strewn with cushions, half-buried harps, and what appears to be a very enthusiastic goose in a toga. Oh no, Dionysus groans. We've reached the rehearsal tent. You blink for the wedding that never quite happened, or happened too many times, depending on which version you read. You step forward and immediately hear it. Panpipes tuning themselves, an off-key lyre testing scales, and in the middle of it all, Ariadne. She's radiant, theatrical, and currently arguing with a chorus of half-dressed satyrs about floral arrangements. Let's rewind. Ariadne, daughter of King Minos, expert labyrinth navigator, former girlfriend of that guy Theseus who keeps getting statues in places he never visited. The myths say she helped him escape the Minotaur, got ditched on the island of Naxos, and, depending on the mood of the poet, was either heartbroken or totally fine with the upgrade when Dionysus showed up. Today, she's in full director mode. "The goats wear gold sashes," she barks, "not bronze. This is a divine wedding, not a farmer's banquet." Dionysus tiptoes over, eyes wide. She's been planning this pageant for, 2,000 years? Ariadne spots you, then beams. "Ah, we have an audience. You'll love the finale. There's interpretive grape stunting." You sit gingerly on a pillow that smells like cinnamon and nostalgia. Around you, the chaos unfolds in drowsy, delightful waves. Satyrs misplace tambourines. A nymph insists the wine fountain be moved 6 inches to the left. The goose honks to signal its solo. Amid the flurry, Dionysus sits beside you. "Mainstream history treats this as a simple rescue romance," he murmurs. "But if you really trace the older versions, it's likely older than even Homer. Ariadne may have been a goddess in her own right before getting absorbed into my narrative. There's debate, of course." You look at her again, her commanding presence, the way the meadow seems to lean toward her voice, and you can see it. Maybe she wasn't rescued. Maybe she took one look at Theseus's brooding hero act and upgraded to wine, music, and eternal spring. Historians still argue whether Dionysus and Ariadne's marriage was symbolic of divine union or seasonal ritual, you whisper, absorbing the strange sweetness of the scene. But here, it feels like a collaborative project. Dionysus claps politely as a satyr attempts a cartwheel and falls into a pastry tent. We're still figuring it out. The meadow ripples with activity. A choral group of owls practices harmonic hooting. A donkey in sequin slippers attempts to moonwalk. Flowers bloom in tune with Ariadne's gestures. It's a midsummer night fever dream, ridiculous, tender, and a little bit sleepy. Quirky tidbit time. One ancient vase depicts Ariadne holding a whip, not because she's fierce, though she is, but because she's wrangling dancing lions. Your brain files that under wedding goals. She joins you now, sitting on your other side. "I've changed the ending," she says softly. "In this version, we don't fade into stars or symbols. We stay. We plan the party forever. It keeps evolving." You nod, not quite sure if this is myth or metaphor, or whether you care. Dionysus grins at her. "We should probably tell them about the bed." You blink. "The what?" "The bed," she laughs. "One poet claimed our wedding bed was made of ivy and honeycomb, and it floated on the sea. Another said it had legs carved like dolphins. Another, well, that one's best left for the more scandalous scrolls." They both laugh. You sink deeper into the pillow. The image of a floating, honey-soaked, dolphin-legged bed spinning gently in your mind like a paper boat. Ariadne leans close. "You know, I'm not upset with Theseus anymore. He had his role, but he never would have tolerated the goose choir." The goose hunks proudly on cue. Music picks up. The rehearsal shifts into a dreamy processional. Lanterns drift in midair. The satyrs, mostly on beat, perform a slow, ridiculous conga line around a hydrangea bush. Dionysus offers you a goblet of something that tastes like nostalgia and grape jelly. "No two versions agree on how we met," he says. "But maybe they're all true, or all lies. That's the beauty." Ariadne nods. "When mortals tell stories, they tidy them up, add a moral. We just live them." The sky shifts, dusky lavender now, dotted with faint stars. You hear a lull in the chaos, a breath before the next rehearsal wave. The gods beside you look like they've always belonged here, part myth, part memory, part warm blanket wrapped in ancient laughter. You close your eyes for a second and imagine the bed. Honeycomb sheets, ivy pillow, sea breeze ruffling the canopy. A place with no wrong endings. In the background, the chorus begins again, soft, off-key, and utterly enchanting. You feel yourself drift just a little further, wrapped in wedding songs no human ever quite remembered the same way twice. The meadow behind you blurs into a shimmer of lantern light and fading laughter as Dionysus rises and waves a final goodbye to Ariadne. She doesn't wave back, too busy teaching the goose a new routine involving streamers and a tambourine. Honestly, it might be her masterpiece. You follow the wine god down a winding footpath that seems to unspool from the edge of the meadow like a ribbon made of moonlight and old parchment. The air here is different, cooler, calmer, with a faint scent of myrrh and slightly burnt toast. "Where are we going now?" you murmur, careful not to step on the sleeping mushrooms. Dionysus hums. To the part of the story that people forget, or skip, or ignore entirely because it doesn't fit into a neat little lesson. My time in disguise. You raise an eyebrow. Wasn't all of this a disguise? He grins. Ah, but this was a particularly good one. I wore a mortal body, lived among them, served quietly in the court of a mortal king. No fanfare, no grape fountains, just observing, stirring pots, occasionally summoning a squirrel to deliver mail. The scene around you changes again. Now you're in the courtyard of a modest palace, stone walls cooled by ivy, servants bustling gently in the background. In the center sits a curious figure, King Pentheus of Thebes. Pentheus is sharp-cheeked and tightly wound. He reads scrolls like they're disappointing job applications, and he really does not like Dionysus. Historians still argue whether Pentheus is meant to represent rigid order or blind arrogance, Dionysus mutters, as you peer at the king from a discreet corner. Either way, he's the kind of guy who labels his wine bottles alphabetically and hates surprise birthdays. You watch as the king interrogates a messenger about strange sightings, women dancing wildly in the hills, vines overtaking fences overnight, milk and honey pouring from tree bark. He scowls like someone just accused him of enjoying a flute solo. This is the setting of one of Dionysus's most dramatic and least sleepy myths, the Bacchae. But you're here for the quieter, stranger bits, the moments between the lines. In this version, Dionysus enters Thebes not as himself, but as a gentle, soft-spoken stranger. He's barefoot, wears a headband, probably smells like crushed rose petals and a little bit of rebellion. Pentheus is immediately suspicious. "Who are you?" he demands. The stranger just smiles. "I'm nobody special, just here to share stories, and maybe a dance or two." The king isn't impressed. "This is Thebes. We don't dance. We attend meetings." Dionysus tilts his head. "And how's that working out for you?" You chuckle softly. Even centuries later, it's a perfect roast. Now, here's the fun part. Dionysus doesn't immediately smite, summon, or sparkle. He waits. He lets the unease spread like ivy. He lets mortals ask questions. Some start sneaking out at night, drawn to the hills. They sing. They forget their titles. They loosen their belts, metaphorically and sometimes literally. One older scribe carves musical notes into official reports. A palace dog learns to balance grapes on its nose. The city changes, quietly, weirdly, joyfully. But Pentheus digs in deeper. "This is dangerous," he mutters. "This is chaos." Quirky side note? One obscure source claims Pentheus once tried to outlaw laughter after sunset. No one enforces it, but it explains the curiously grumpy guards. And through it all, Dionysus, still undercover, watches. He doesn't rush. He lets people unravel at their own pace, like a cat watching a ball of yarn do its thing. Eventually, the tension boils over. Pentheus decides to spy on the revelers. But instead of going himself, he agrees to be disguised. Yes, disguised as a woman. That's the twist. Dionysus offers to help with the makeover. You picture it, a divine god gently applying eyeliner to a suspicious king while whispering, "A little rouge never hurt anyone." Historians still debate whether this cross-dressing scene was intended as satire, sacred ritual, or both, Dionysus says, adjusting a leaf on a passing statue. I say yes.
Of course, in the original myth, Pentheus meets a grim end, but here, in this sleepy retelling, things stop just short of tragedy. You see the king tiptoe up the hillside, disguised and deeply confused. He watches his subjects dance, laugh, collapse into naps in sun-dappled groves. No one notices him, no one cares. And maybe, for one brief second, he understands. He drops the scroll in his hand, he relaxes his jaw. He almost joins in the dance. Back in the courtyard, you and Dionysus sit under a pomegranate tree. "It's easy to hate Pentheus," he says quietly, but truthfully, he was just afraid. Of joy, of surrender, of losing his crown-shaped cage. You nod, watching a servant attempt to herd 6 tipsy goats out of the palace kitchen. It's a good reminder. Even in myths, not everyone gets the message. But sometimes, just sometimes, they get close enough to hear the music.
The pomegranate tree fades behind you, its branches giving way to a rippling shoreline dappled with moonlight. You and Dionysus now stroll along a beach that smells faintly of salt, wine, and roasted figs. A strangely delightful combination that probably wouldn't make it into a candle line, but still. Ahead lies a ship. Or what used to be a ship. It's stuck, halfway beached on the sand, tangled in ivy and grapevines. Seagulls have taken up residence in the rigging, and something that looks suspiciously like a satyr is snoring from inside a barrel marked raisins. You glance at Dionysus. "This the ship?" you ask. He nods with mock solemnity. "Ah, yes, the ship, the pirate's ship, the one that tried to kidnap me." You pause. "Wait, you got kidnapped? You?" He sighs. "People always think gods are immune to bad decisions made by others. Unfortunately, hubris is an equal opportunity employer." Here's how it went down. Dionysus, once again traveling incognito, he really leans into this whole mysterious stranger thing, was wandering near the coast of Icarus. That's when a crew of Tyrrhenian pirates spotted him. "They thought I was just a well-dressed, delicate noble," he says, which, to be fair, wasn't totally inaccurate. I was wearing silk. The pirates, assuming he was a rich youth to ransom, seized him and dragged him aboard. There were, predictably, many red flags. For one, he didn't resist. For another, their ropes kept slipping off his wrists. One even swore the ropes turned into ivy, but was quickly told to stop drinking the seawater. Historians still argue whether the pirate episode was an allegory for impiety, arrogance, or simply a good excuse to turn people into dolphins, Dionysus says, already chuckling. Because yes, that's how this ends, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. You step onto the deck, the wood creaking beneath your feet, though the ship is more a floating vineyard now. Vines twist through every plank, curling around the anchor and up the mast. Bunches of grapes sway gently with the ocean breeze. Dionysus gestures grandly. "Welcome aboard the good ship Mistake." You imagine the crew, pacing the deck, nervously side-eyeing their strangely serene prisoner. Some accounts say Dionysus stood there humming. Others suggest he conjured a panther in the captain's quarters. One extremely fringe theory says he briefly transformed into a singing dolphin wearing a toga. That one's probably metaphorical. Probably. The pirate captain, let's call him Kragos, because every pirate deserves a grumpy name, tried to take command. "Get the sails up! We sail to Naxos and ransom this sparkly fool!" One sailor, less convinced, whispered to another, "I think he just turned my oar into fennel." Indeed, odd things began happening. Wine flowed from the mast. Ivy bloomed on the sails. Harpsichord music started drifting from the cargo hold, despite there being no harpsichord. And the sea? It changed color. Just a bit. More plum. Quirky note, Dionysus adds as he skips over a coil of vine-covered rope. Some say I summoned mirages, visions of parties, of old loves, of, embarrassing childhood flute recitals. Really kept the pirates off balance. Eventually, Kragos grew furious. He raised his sword and shouted, "This isn't natural!" And that when it happened. Dionysus simply blinked, and suddenly he wasn't a soft-spoken captive anymore. He shimmered, grew. His tunic morphed into something regal, wild, woven from stars and fermented joy. A crown of ivy appeared on his head, and from the ship's shadows emerged companions, panthers, leopards, even a flute-playing lynx. Historians still debate whether this moment was divine revelation or simply really good stagecraft, Dionysus says, adjusting his imaginary cape.
The pirates screamed. Some jumped overboard. Others tried to row away using spoons. And those who stayed? Well, he didn't punish them. Not in the way you'd think. He simply changed them. One by one, they slipped beneath the waves, but not in fear, in transformation. As their limbs fused and their forms shrank, they emerged again, sleek, joyful, echoing with new song. Dolphins! Some of the finest conversationalists I've ever met, Dionysus says fondly. They visit me still, bring seaweed bouquets. One even tried to organize a synchronized swim team. You sit on the edge of the boat, now less a ship than a floating garden, watching the water ripple with laughter. A pod of dolphins breaks the surface, spinning lazily beneath the moon. Do they remember, you ask? Always, Dionysus says. They remember what it feels like to be foolish, and then forgiven. For a moment, you close your eyes, lulled by the lap of waves and distant flute melodies. The ship sways like a cradle, and Dionysus leans beside you, surprisingly quiet. You know, he says softly, this part of the myth, it isn't about vengeance, it's about transformation, about letting yourself be changed by something bigger, wilder, kinder than you expected. You nod. It's hard not to, when the ocean hums back in agreement. And somewhere far beneath the waves, a dolphin wearing a slightly crooked crown whistles a tune that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby. Morning has not yet arrived, but the sky is lightening, slowly, sleepily, as if it, too, needs a moment to stretch before beginning the day. You and Dionysus sit in companionable silence aboard the now vine-wrapped ship, watching as mist curls along the waves like steam from a cup of warm chamomile. So, you finally murmur, what happened after the whole pirate-to-dolphin thing? Dionysus stretches, cracking his knuckles in a distinctly ungodlike way. Oh, the usual. I wandered, collected a few more cults, inspired some mosaics, invented another drinking song or two. He pauses. But I also found something I wasn't expecting. Curiosity piqued, you tilt your head. Which was? He looks almost sheepish. A kind of peace. The story continues, almost reluctantly, as though the god prefers to dwell on chaos and mirth, but this part of his myth is different. After the pirate incident, Dionysus wandered inland, not as a raging god, but as a quieter, more thoughtful presence. It was during this period that he came across a small village perched between the slopes of two olive-covered hills. The people there lived simple lives, herding goats, pressing oil, whispering to their vines like they were beloved children. Historians still argue whether this village was real or allegorical, Dionysus notes, drawing a little grape in the condensation on the railing. I think both. The best things usually are. In this village, the people didn't know he was a god, or if they did, they didn't mention it. They simply gave him bread, a mat to sleep on, and asked him to help with the harvest. Imagine it, you, a god of madness and revelry, being handed a basket and told to prune the southern vines before lunch, and doing it. They treated me like someone worth knowing, not just worshipping, he says. You can picture it vividly. Dionysus, sweaty in the Greek sun, swatting flies and humming a song only the grapes understand.
Maybe the villagers thought him odd with his poetic turns of phrase and tendency to talk to the local fig tree, but they left him be. One child, a girl named Anthea, even drew him a picture of a lion drinking tea. He still has it. Did they ever find out who you were, you ask? Dionysus shrugs. Maybe, but they never treated me differently. That was the gift. He spent a season there, perhaps more, long enough to celebrate the harvest festival, long enough for Anthea to grow 2 inches, long enough to forget that he had once turned a ship of pirates into dolphins and danced with leopards under a full moon. Of course, word eventually got out. A traveler mentioned a strange man who could summon fig jam from thin air. A merchant whispered about a visitor whose wine never ran dry. The temple priests came looking. And that, he says with a sigh, was the end of my quiet spell.
The villagers were heartbroken to lose him. Anthea cried. Dionysus gave her a necklace made of ivy leaves and promised the vines would always bloom brightest for her. But you could have stayed, you say, voice soft. He smiles sadly. Gods don't get to stay. We're reminders, not residents. That line lingers. Before leaving, Dionysus left behind a gift. He blessed the soil. From that day on, the olives grew fatter, the grapes sweeter, and the wine from that village became sought after across the Aegean. Even today, some vintners whisper about a hidden grove whose vines never rot. Quirky fact, Dionysus adds, one modern Greek winery claims to use a cutting from my personal vineyard. They charge 450 bottles a bottle. Tastes like nostalgia and cinnamon. As the ship creaks gently beneath you, you realize this myth, the whole chaotic, wine-splashed thing, was never really about pirates or punishment. It was about recognition, about being seen, not as a god or a threat, but as someone a little lonely, a little too much for polite society, and somehow still welcome. You lean back, letting the sounds of the sea and distant dolphin song lull you. The vines sway gently above, casting leafy shadows that dance like sleep. Do you miss it? You ask. Dionysus doesn't reply right away. He watches the horizon, where dawn is beginning to flirt with the clouds. Sometimes, he finally says, but I've learned that every party ends, and that's okay. What matters is how you say goodbye. You close your eyes. The deck feels warmer now, as if the vines themselves are offering comfort. The scent of crushed grapes fills the air, and a seabird calls lazily overhead. You're not sure whether you're drifting into sleep or deeper into the story, but at this point, does it matter? The ship rocks gently. Somewhere, dolphins whistle a lullaby only gods and dreamers understand. The sky, now awash in early lavender hues, reflects off the water like spilled wine diluted with milk. The ship glides gently over the Aegean, its wooden frame creaking with a rhythm that could almost be mistaken for breathing. You sit beside Dionysus, still sleepy from dreams, or maybe memories, of quiet villages and fig trees that know secrets. I suppose, you murmur, the peace didn't last forever. He smirks. Nothing does, especially when you're me. After his peaceful detour, Dionysus found himself once more pulled into the wide, weird world of gods, mortals, and mischief. The grape god had responsibilities after all. There were ceremonies to crash, philosophers to confuse, and a growing fan base to attend to. Cults were popping up like mushrooms after rain, and with popularity came problems. You ever try managing followers from 3 continents? He asks, raising an eyebrow. It's like herding satyrs after a full moon party. You chuckle. But there's a truth here. Worship is noisy business. It requires stories, symbols, rituals, and the occasional theatrical miracle. And Dionysus, reluctant or not, had become a symbol.
This is where things get especially mythologically messy. Cities began to compete over who had the real Dionysian rites. Some burned incense and sang hymns. Others, well, let's just say they got a bit enthusiastic with the nudity and shouting. Historians still argue whether these rites were purely metaphorical or full-on wine-fueled marathons of chaos, Dionysus says, nudging you gently with his elbow. I say, ¿por qué no los dos? Imagine it. Torchlit processions winding through the countryside, men and women in ivy wreaths calling out to the night, masks painted with exaggerated smiles, wine flowing like rivers, drums pounding like ancient heartbeats. The kind of night where boundaries blur, between people, between worlds, between myth and memory. Quirky detail? In one obscure variation of the ritual, initiates had to recite their dreams backward while balancing a bunch of grapes on their heads. Divine nonsense, Dionysus calls it fondly. He was both everywhere and nowhere, appearing in visions, in dreams, in the sudden urge to dance for no reason at all. His presence lingered in laughter, in fermentation, in moments when people let go of control and simply were. You ask him if he enjoyed it, the adoration, the chaos, the immortality. I liked the intention, he says, not always the execution. Sometimes people just need permission to feel. That's what I was really giving them. Permission to feel. To grieve, to laugh, to dance badly and love messily, to be fully, joyfully human. In one of the more obscure corners of myth, there's a tale of a Roman senator who tried to outlaw Dionysian rites entirely. Too unpredictable, he claimed, too disruptive. The god's response? He turned the senator's wine into vinegar and gave his prized fig tree stage fright. It shriveled for 3 years, Dionysus chuckles, clearly pleased with the memory. He was both everywhere and nowhere, appearing in visions, in dreams, in the sudden urge to dance for no reason at all. His presence lingered in laughter, in fermentation, in moments when people let go of control and simply were. You ask him if he enjoyed it, the adoration, the chaos, the immortality. I liked the intention, he says, not always the execution. Sometimes people just need permission to feel. That's what I was really giving them. Permission to feel, to grieve, to laugh, to dance badly and love messily, to be fully, joyfully human. In one of the more obscure corners of myth, there's a tale of a Roman senator who tried to outlaw Dionysian rites entirely. Too unpredictable, he claimed, too disruptive. The god's response? He turned the senator's wine into vinegar and gave his prized fig tree stage fright. It shriveled for 3 years, Dionysus chuckles, clearly pleased with the memory. You can feel that trickster energy humming beneath the surface of his calm exterior. He's not malevolent, just necessary. Like a thunderstorm in a drought. Like the second glass of wine you weren't going to have, but did, and suddenly found yourself confessing your childhood dream of becoming a professional dolphin impersonator. The ship sails on, steady and gentle. Above, seagulls circle lazily, as though they too are in no rush. Dionysus stretches his arms overhead, and the vines on the mast bloom in response. Lilies this time, their petals blushing with hints of gold. So, you ask, do you think they still remember you, the people? He closes his eyes. Not always, not by name, but I'm there, in music festivals, in garden parties, in the clink of 2 glasses meeting in toast. I live in every moment where someone chooses joy over judgment. He opens one eye to glance at you. And yes, also in every bottle of suspiciously strong homebrew someone's uncle brings to the barbecue. There's something comforting about that thought, that the old gods haven't left, just mellowed, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be remembered, with laughter and a bit of wobbly dancing. You stretch out on the deck, the warmth of the wood against your back. The wind sings through the rigging like a lullaby. Dionysus hums a tune you don't recognize, but somehow already know. Somewhere far off, a fishing boat creaks.
A dolphin breaches in a lazy arc. The scent of crushed thyme floats through the air. This part of the myth isn't written in marble or ink. It's written in the quiet moments between revelries, in the stories told softly by candlelight, in the memory of a god who once paused long enough to prune a vine. And tonight, he pauses with you.
The ship drifts lazily now, as though lulled by its own tale. The stars shimmer above like forgotten constellations, the kind that never made it into formal charts but lived in the imaginations of sailors and dreamers. You lie back, half listening to the lapping water and the soft rustle of grape leaves stirred by the sea breeze. Dionysus is humming again, something almost a lullaby, and you realize you haven't asked the most obvious question. "So, the pirates," you murmur, eyes still closed. "What happened after?" He smiles, reclining beside you, fingers laced behind his head. "Ah, yes, the aftermath, my favorite part, or at least the most theatrical. You remember the terrified screams, the ship transforming into a living arbor, the pirates leaping overboard and becoming dolphins. A scene that would make any modern visual effects team throw their hands up and say, 'Sure, but how do we render divine wrath with wine?' Dionysus explains that in some versions of the myth, he simply disappeared after the transformation, leaving behind a boat-turned garden, a flock of confused dolphins, and one traumatized helmsman who, depending on which scroll you read, either founded a vineyard or became a vegan. Historians still argue whether the dolphin pirate myth was meant to serve as moral instruction, he says. You know, a soft warning against hubris, or just a cautionary tale about giving free rides to strangely dressed passengers with glittering eyes. You wonder if the dolphins remember. Do they still feel the pull of salt-stained ropes? Do they dream of treasure and plum wine? It's a question without a real answer, which makes it perfect for bedtime pondering. Now here's where it gets stranger, he says, grinning. There's a theory that one of those dolphins fell in love with a nymph and founded a sea cult dedicated to poetic diving. Or maybe I made that up. Honestly, at this point, you wouldn't be surprised either way. And what of the ship? "Oh, she sailed on," Dionysus murmurs, "even without a crew. Vines can be excellent sailors when given enough sunlight. They don't complain, and they're very patient." Some said the vessel wandered the seas for decades, spotted only during late summer twilights by lonely fishermen who swore they smelled cinnamon and heard distant lyres. Others claimed it became an island, literally rooted in one spot, a tiny paradise for wayward seabirds and retired sea nymphs. Quirky detail? There's a third-hand account from a Carthaginian merchant who swore he saw the ship moored to the moon itself during a particularly strong eclipse. Probably exaggerated, but charming. As the god speaks, you notice the stars above subtly rearranging, forming the silhouette of a ship, sails billowed and proud. You blank, and it's gone. Just another sleepy hallucination. Or myth. The difference feels meaningless now. You ask Dionysus if he ever misses it, the drama, the pageantry, the moments when entire cities would stop to worship, dance, and pour libations into fountains that gurgled like they were in on the joke. "I miss the spontaneity," he says. "Mortals don't surprise themselves as much anymore. They curate their chaos now." You tilt your head? Instagram? He nods solemnly. TikTok, too. You both laugh, and the sound is light, almost musical. The waves mimic the rhythm, a soft chorus of hush and hush and hush.
Then he grows quiet. "There's a reason I never stayed in Olympus long," he says finally. "Too static, too clean. Immortality is a long, boring dinner party unless you sneak out every so often." There's a deep truth to that. Even gods need movement, a little disarray, a chance to drink bad wine and fall into good company. In the distance, a faint glow appears on the horizon. Dawn, probably. But it doesn't feel urgent. The night is still holding space for you, still wrapped around this vessel of memory and gentle madness.
You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the pirate ship as it was. Ropes taut with wind, sails embroidered with gold threads stolen, or liberated, from a noble's laundry line. The crew, lively and utterly unprepared for mythological intervention. The moment before it all changed. Laughter, sea shanties, a jug of suspiciously effervescent wine. And Dionysus, barefoot, lounging with a wine cup that refilled itself, smiling like he knew the punchline to a joke no one else had heard yet. The god interrupts your reverie with a final thought. People remember the dolphins, the vines, the spectacle, but no one ever asks what I was doing there in the first place. You blank. Well, why were you? He shrugs. I got bored, took a detour. Like I said, spontaneity. You chuckle again. Of course that's the reason. Not divine wrath, not destiny, just a cosmic whim from the god of impulse and intoxication. Above, the sky begins to soften from navy to periwinkle. The stars fade like stage lights dimming, and the wind cools ever so slightly. Dionysus stretches one last time and offers you a fig. Not magic, he says, just delicious. You bite into it, sweet, soft, and somehow nostalgic, like summer, like childhood, like an ancient myth told on a porch with fireflies as punctuation. And just before the silence takes over again, Dionysus grins and adds, also, those pirates had it coming. Their playlist was terrible. The fig is gone now, its taste lingering only as a distant sweetness on your tongue. The ship creaks softly under you, not from wear, but from the centuries of stories woven into its hull. Dionysus is reclining again, his goblet half full or half empty, depending on how poetic you're feeling. Around you, the night stretches a little longer, just for your sake. And just when you think the story's winding down, Dionysus lifts a finger as if to say, but wait. There was one more thing, he says. You raise an eyebrow, fully expecting a ridiculous epilogue involving a lion, a misunderstood cyclops, or perhaps a sentient amphora with feelings. Instead, he leans in and whispers, the pirate ship wasn't the first. You blank. What? He gestures upward, where the stars are returning to their ancient choreography. There was a trial run, he explains, a prototype, if you will, a smaller vessel, 3 men, a stolen cart of ceremonial honeycakes, and me, dressed as a traveling beekeeper. You're not even surprised anymore. Of course the god of revelry moonlighted as a beekeeper. He tells you the first tale in a quiet voice, as if the stars might interrupt. The ship set out from a little Ionian port, nothing fancy, just a fishing boat with a confused crew and the unmistakable smell of regret. They took Dionysus on board thinking he was some harmless eccentric with honey-smeared sandals and a twinkle in his eye. They weren't wrong, he says, grinning, but they weren't right either. They tried to rob him mid-voyage, right after lunch, an amateur move, really. He hadn't even digested his honeycakes. Did you turn them into dolphins too, you ask? No, he says, that would have been redundant. I turned them into flamingos. You laugh out loud. Pink flamingos, he confirms. Not native to the Aegean, so it caused quite a stir. Quirky detail? Those flamingos were said to have founded a secret colony on an uncharted island, where they performed elaborate rituals involving synchronized dance, seaweed tiaras, and passive-aggressive squawking. According to one wildly speculative papyrus fragment, the colony later opened a wine-tasting retreat for migratory birds. Historians still argue whether this flamingo incident was a satire, Dionysus admits. Some say it was a veiled critique of early naval arrogance. Others believe I just liked birds. Both are entirely plausible. You ask whether he ever visited them. Oh, I sent them postcards, he says, signed with a grape. The flamingo tale fades into the quiet, Your mind drifts again, to pirates, to vines, to ships lost and found, to the god beside you, who's either the world's greatest improviser or history's most dedicated prankster. Another pause. Then a thought. Dionysus, how do you remember all this? He shrugs. I don't, not always. Sometimes I make it up. Sometimes I overhear it in a dream. He looks at you, eyes twinkling. But that doesn't make it less true, does it? You're not sure how to answer that, but you find yourself nodding anyway. Mortals need stories, he continues, even the ridiculous ones, especially the ridiculous ones, because they remind you that the world isn't made entirely of straight lines and taxes. You chuckle, then yawn. I should warn you, he adds, there's one more version of the pirate story where they all survive, retire to a quiet coastal village, and open a chain of artisanal ouzo bars. You groan. Of course there is. They specialize in fig syrup and seafoam cocktails. He pauses. Very trendy. You close your eyes again, the ship rocking just slightly, as though adjusting itself into a more comfortable memory. Somewhere in the distance, you hear music, faint and a little off-key. A lyre? No, a pan flute, or both. It's hard to tell, and doesn't really matter. The sea glows faintly now, kissed by the edge of the oncoming dawn. But Dionysus doesn't seem in a rush. Neither are you. He hands you another fig, and this time it tastes like moonlight. You chew slowly. You're not leaving yet, are you? He shakes his head. Not until the last word of the story. And for the first time, you understand something important. Stories don't really end. They meander, they double back, they hide behind metaphor and nap under fig trees. But if you listen closely, they're always still whispering. Even the boring ones, especially the boring ones. Like the one where a god got bored, hitched a ride with pirates, and turned the whole adventure into a sleepy, wine-stained parable for insomniacs and dreamers alike. You take another breath, the kind that settles deep in your chest, the kind that means you're almost ready for sleep. The god of stories and sensations, sitting beside you, just smiles and says, "Let's stay a little longer." You and Dionysus sit in that hush. The sea calm around you, the night now a soft lavender veil slowly melting into the earliest whisper of morning. The ship barely moves, just the gentlest creak now and then, as if it's tired too. But Dionysus isn't finished, not just yet. There's a final version, he says, but it's more of a footnote, really. You raise an eyebrow. A footnote? Yes, he nods. A version where none of it happened. You blink, unsure whether to laugh or just blink again. You mean the pirate ship? The wine? The transformation into dolphins? All of it, he says with a theatrical wave. Just a misremembered tale. A rumor started by a shepherd who saw a bearded man fall off a fishing boat with a jug of wine and decided he must be a god. You imagine the shepherd, squinting at the sea, scratching his head, inventing entire mythologies just to explain why someone would bring fermented grapes on a sailing trip. That tracks. Dionysus chuckles. Historians still argue whether the original myth was meant to celebrate divine justice, mock human foolishness, or simply serve as a cautionary tale about bringing mortals into the divine carpool. Or all three, you offer? Exactly. Then he gestures at the sky. A few stars still linger stubbornly, refusing to be chased off by dawn. Besides, he says, I prefer the version you heard tonight. You smile. The one with dolphins and figs and pirate baristas? He grins. That's the one. The deluxe edition, remastered in dream vision. There's a pause. A real one. A long, slow, necessary pause. You shift slightly, finding a more comfortable spot on the deck. The wood is warm now, as if storing the memory of 1,000 sunrises. You can feel the ship humming, not with motion, but with meaning, like it knows this moment is meant to last. And Dionysus? He stretches out beside you, arms folded behind his head, utterly unbothered by the mechanics of time. Is it strange, you ask softly, to be a god of both chaos and comfort? He doesn't answer right away, just lies there, eyes half-lidded. Then, not really. Most comfort comes from chaos. The best naps happen after the storm. That's oddly profound.
You let it settle. Then, do you think the pirates knew who you were? A grin. Oh, they figured it out right around the time the mast sprouted grapevines. That tracks too. A breeze rolls across the water, smelling faintly of thyme and salt. You breathe it in deeply, letting it fill your lungs, and then seep out in one long, slow sigh. Your body feels like it's dissolving into the ship, like you've become part of the story now. Another one of Dionysus's sleepier footnotes. "You'll tell this again, won't you?" you murmur. "Oh, definitely," he says, "but next time there might be a talking goat. Depends on my mood." You don't question that. Instead, you close your eyes. And now, the waves whisper lullabies in ancient syllables you'll never fully understand. The fig tree blossoms again in some other memory, in some other myth. The pirates are dolphins now, and the dolphins are dreams, and the dreams are sailing on without you. And the god of revelry, in all his wine-soaked wisdom, is finally quiet. Just you now. You and the soft, sleepy sway of the boring Greek myth that wasn't so boring after all. And so we drift, quietly, toward the end. The ship, the god, the figs, the laughter, all of it begins to dissolve into the soft static of sleep. The sea flattens out, the waves hush their chatter, and even the stars seem to dim their glow to let you rest. There's nothing left for you to do now. No sails to hoist, no pirates to outwit, no divine riddles to untangle. Just the comfort of a story well told, and a bed, or a pillow, or a couch, gently holding your weight, like a memory from childhood. Your breathing is slow, steady, matching the ancient rhythm of the tide. That quiet pulse, older than language, older than myths. The same rhythm the dolphins followed, the same tempo that fig trees knew by heart. Your mind might wander, briefly, back to that glimmering coastline, that impossible mast made of vines, the taste of honey and salt on your tongue. Let it wander, let it drift. That's the way home. And if you find yourself back on that ship again, someday, in some dream, don't be surprised if Dionysus is already there, reclining with a grin, ready to tell the tale one more time. Maybe this time with a talking goat. For now, though, rest. You are safe. You are held. The story has ended, but your sleep is just beginning. Let go. Let go. Let go. Sweet dreams.